So, good evening everyone. Welcome to your editorial discussion class. We are going to cover the topics of environment, geography, and disaster management and internal security. Okay. So, none of you are giving mains this time, right? So, what we have done, we have tried to do is to cover topics which are relevant for this year's mains as well, and which are landmark topics over the last 1 year for these supposed subjects. So you have to remember that because you will be taking the mains next year. So you will have to track these news or pieces of items which you're going to discuss today. Okay. So make sure that you keep in mind whatever is being taught is not the final thing for you. Because these rules or whatever the developments that we're going to discuss, most of them will be definitely updated over the next 1 year. So this will act as a good sort of yardstick for you to understand that what you need to follow in the current affairs. Fine. Because current affairs itself becomes an unending sort of well. Okay. So do you guys follow the newspaper mostly, or what do you do? What is your source of current affairs right now? What do you do? Especially after this year's prelims, what is your plan? Newspaper daily. Anything else? Anything new? PIB explainers. Anything else apart from newspapers and PIB explainer?
Analytical videos of Vajram, and they also provide content for that.
Fine.
So skip the newspaper and read because they provide extra material in itself.
See, it depends on where you are. If you've taken the prelims or if you've written the mains, then you don't need to read the newspaper every day. I'm sure if you've written the mains, then you know that you must have gone through a lot of information and then you must have consolidated it at some level in your mind. So you don't have to do that. Just understand one thing before we begin. See, the nature of the exam is changing and it has changed over the past couple of years. The basic trend and the basic divergence in the prelims and the mains is as follows. Prelims is becoming more and more vague and mains is becoming more and more specific. So if you have encountered either the prelims or the mains, you must have observed this, that the prelims exam has no clear now guardrails as to where you have to stop in terms of current affairs. Fine, because this year the questions that were asked, they could not be solved on the basis of any trick or any such feel. If you knew, you knew. If you know, you know. If you don't, then you don't. Okay. And the vagueness, that will result in a bit of distraction in your strategy as well. So again, what we will do, because see, we know people who had cleared the last year's prelims and most of them have again cleared this year's prelims. So there is a certain batch of people who are clearing the prelims again based on the same knowledge. So if you have cleared the prelims in the past, then do not judge yourself or do not doubt your strategy. Just make sure that you focus on selective stuff and you have to strategize your prelims paper in a clear way. You have to identify your strong areas, strong suits, and then you have to also hope for a bit of good luck. There is no alternative, there is a bit of component of luck involved. Mains, where it goes. Mains, earlier it used to be a little more generic. If any of you have seen the papers from 2018, 17, 16, you must have seen that the questions had a certain ease of answerability. Like if you knew something basic about that topic, you could answer them. But now you will see the current trend. Suppose GS3 paper. GS3 paper is not giving you good marks. Even GS1 is not giving good marks. Why? Because the questions are becoming more and more specific. So that specificity can only be, the problem of that can be solved if you know the kind of information that you have to study. And for that, only one good friend you have is the PYQs. What you have to understand is they are going for something which is PYQ adjacent. So even today, the topics that we've chosen, they're all adjacent to the PYQs. So there is no speciality that any one of us has that you cannot develop. All you have to do is ensure that you have a thorough knowledge of the PYQs. Last 20 years, 30 years, if you memorize the PYQs, then your current affairs journey will become very easy. At least easier than it is right now. If you don't know the PYQs, if you cannot tell me what question has been asked, on the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, then you are just going to be lost in this world of current affairs. You will be reading compendiums or newspapers and there will be no end to it. However, if you know what are the questions that have been asked, then your problem will be easily solved. So firstly, before we begin, today we're going to discuss 12 topics and you will probably write them down. They might come in the exam or not, but you just remember the approach. Try to memorize your PYQs first, especially for your mains exam. Then only will you be able to do your current affairs in the right way. Otherwise, you will get lost. Okay. The basic framework for any topic that you are studying, any current affair, is just very simple. You have to know the definition first. UPSC loves definitions. If you can't define anything, then you cannot be a very good, answer writer or a bureaucrat in the future. So anything you have to study in terms of current affairs, you have to look at firstly the definition. Secondly, a bit of background. Suppose we are going to talk about the solid waste management rules 2026. So you have to know what were the 2016 rules. Fine. So you have to ensure that you know the evolution of any topic. Thirdly, whatever is being asked in the body, you have to address in your mains answer. And you have to look at two things for any topic. One are the issues or challenges. Whatever is being asked, you have to know or write the issues or the challenges. And secondly, the way forward or the solutions. So this is the simplest framework that you have to follow. And for any topic, your note should be like this. Apart from this, for any current affair or any such repeated theme, you need to have pre-made introductions and conclusions. That's it. So this will be your total framework for your mains exam. Anyone who's watching for 2026 also, remember this. Even if you cannot prepare it within the next 2 months, just try to write your answer in this way. Make sure that whatever you have learned, whatever you can remember, you put it in this framework and that is it. And if you have any doubt on this, just check out the toppers copies. The next thing after the PYQs, that what you have to look at are the topper copies. If you know and if you see what the toppers are writing and what is their level, then automatically, and if you're too well versed with that, then automatically you will hit the same level in your mains exam. So PYQs, the related themes and the toppers copies. Nothing is much more, above that. Apart from this, whatever we are going to try to hit, what we are doing is trying to hit the right thing. It might succeed, it might not succeed. But just let me assure you, the framework that we'll be following, some of these points will definitely be of use to you. So whatever we're going to go through today, I'm sure you maybe have good knowledge on all these topics, but this will just act as a good sort of target setting for you. Fine. The level of knowledge that you all have today in the age of AI, information and knowledge are easily, absorbable and achievable. The only thing that you need to understand is where to hit, because that is your biggest challenge. Fine. Any questions regarding any general aspect of current affairs or preparation? So definitely in today's day and age, there is no need to, if you cannot read the newspapers, there is no compulsion. If you can, then you can go through a light cursory reading. If you're spending 2 to 3 hours on the newspaper, you're going wrong. So if you're doing that, just stop that and rather focus on the static PYQ themes or the toppers copies or whatever MCQ practice that you want to do. Fine. The only wrong or red flag here is if you're spending 2 to 3 hours every day. That is the worst thing that you can do. Is anyone doing that here in class? I hope not. Okay. So none of you should be indulging in that. Just make sure you go through your basic PYQs and topper copies. That is it. Fine. Let's begin. We'll be quick. Firstly, we'll start with the geography topic. That will be relevant for this year as well as the next year. So when it comes to geography, you all know there are two basic streams, the physical geography stream and the human geography stream. Regarding physical geography, what the questions are asked are usually from the plate tectonics theory when it comes to the geomorphology part. Regarding the rest of the components of physical geography, the questions are asked from basic climate science. So a combination of ocean sciences, oceanography and climatology. But these are rarely from the NCERT. If you see the mains paper of UPSC, the questions are not directly from the NCERT. They are from certain theories and certain basic knowledge of geography, which geography optional students might be aware of, but non-geography students might not be aware of. So we'll try to focus on those kind of news over the next year. So anything related to any earthquake, anything related to anything regarding climate change, the Arctic, you have to follow and you have to make sure that you have basic background on it. Okay, certain articles will have a lot of information, but you need to have 2 to 3 data points and the trends that you should understand. So the first topic that we're going to look at is Super El Nino. Fine. I'm sure you must have all read about El Nino. El Nino, the phenomenon of El Nino, you're clear about it? So what is El Nino?
When the trade winds in Central Pacific Ocean gets reversed and there is a shortage of rainfall in India.
But what is El Nino? What is it? El Nino, is it something in the air, something in the water? What is it?
It is due to a formation of weakening of water.
No. Just tell me the definition. How do you define El Nino? What is El Nino? Is El Nino a wind? Or is it an ocean current? Or what is El Nino? What exactly is it?
It is mainly related to ocean current, but we can refer it as an atmospheric phenomenon.
Okay. Anything else? See, it's partially right. El Nino is basically the warming of the oceanic waters in the Pacific. So when you know about the trade winds, if you have done your foundation course, you must have a basic idea of it. However, we'll revise. See, this is the Earth, this is the equator, these are the tropics. Now what happens is, the maximum insolation the Earth receives is in this area, from the 23°½ north to 23°½ south. Why? Because the Earth itself is tilted at this angle towards the sun. So beyond that, the direct sun rays do not fall on the Earth. Fine, so these are the hottest areas of the planet. What happens is, at the equator, the lowest of the pressures occurs. Why? Because the insolation is maximum. Here, the warm air rises, it moves towards the poles, and at this point, at around 30 degrees north and south, it finally cools enough to again subside. Fine. What happens is, this creates a higher pressure here, and this evaporation creates a lower pressure here. The basic laws of physics state that anything in a fluid medium will move from a higher pressure to a lower pressure. So the wind or the air that will flow from this higher pressure to the lower pressure, but the Earth is rotating on its axis. Because of this rotation, there is a bending in this movement of air mass. So it bends towards the right in the northern hemisphere and towards the left in the southern hemisphere. These winds are your trade winds and they converge at the zone which is called the intertropical convergence zone. This is the basic normal condition of the planet. What happens is, anybody has an idea why this El Nino phenomenon occurs? Why this excess warming? See, these winds are coming and they are pooling all the waters. Suppose if this is the Pacific Ocean. Let me draw it. So the Pacific Ocean is somewhat of a horseshoe-shaped basin. Everyone, I hope you all know. So these winds will pile up the waters in a natural way towards the western Pacific Ocean basin. Fine. Now, El Nino is what? Is the warming of the waters of the central and the eastern Pacific. So why would this be happening? Weakening of the trade winds. What could be the reason?
Strengthening of counter-equatorial current.
Why would that be getting strengthened?
Mainly due to the influence of trade winds.
Fine, but trade winds, why are they getting weakened? Why is the counter-equatorial current becoming stronger? What is the basic disruption that is happening? The answer is not clear yet. This is a matter of research, that what exactly causes these trade winds to fluctuate. However, there are something called the westerly wind bursts. So these basically are bursts of winds or low pressure that come from the western direction. So they are called westerly wind bursts. What they're doing is that they're disrupting this normal pattern of trade winds. Now, as these trade winds are getting weakened, that leads to the lesser pooling up of the warm waters towards the western Pacific Ocean basin. This is El Nino. Then there is something else called the southern oscillation. This southern oscillation is basically the fluctuation in pressure from the east to the west in a periodic way. So whenever there is more and more pooling of warm waters towards the western basin, what will happen? Will there be a lower pressure here? Because of the warmer waters, there will be more evaporation, lower pressures, and then the air will rise, and then it moves in an east-west direction towards the eastern part of the basin where it cools and subsides. So there is a high pressure here. What will happen here? There will be a periodic fluctuation. Why? Again, because the trade winds are getting weakened. So this thing is called the southern oscillation. Fine. So this is the basic phenomenon. This is, it's just a fluctuation in the atmospheric pressure conditions. So El Nino southern oscillation, this becomes the coupled oceanic and atmospheric phenomenon, wherein El Nino is the oceanic component and the southern oscillation is the atmospheric component of this whole phenomenon. Basically, there is a fluctuation of pressure as well as the pooling of waters that is getting, suppose it's like a pendulum on one side at one point and then after a few years on the other side. Fine. This is what is El Nino. Now, what is Super El Nino? Super El Nino is basically when the anomaly, that is the hotter part of the eastern Pacific Ocean basin, that is hotter than more than 2 degrees centigrades than what is the average in El Nino conditions. So when it is more than 2 degrees hotter, then that condition is called Super El Nino. Right now, what this event is being characterized as Nino 3.4. That is more than or around 3.4 degrees higher than the average El Nino temperatures. So this is what is being characterized or called as the Super El Nino. Various famines have been correlated with the existence of the Super El Nino. However, we do not have exact records. Why? Because monitoring was not being done during those times. So there is a simple just fact that the actual observations, they started from 1970s onward, when the field of oceanic sciences, it started getting some technological aids. Before that, we do not have the exact records. We only have proxies. For example, we have a record of a famine or some other climatic records, the rainfall records. So we can correlate with them to establish or help establish if there was an El Nino in the past. Somewhere in the 19th century, an El Nino is supposed to have been occurring. However, this is the current situation right now. What could be the cause of this now? Because mains answers usually have, in terms of climate and whatever is asked in the physical geography part, the only correlation is with this aspect only. What could be the reason for this? Why Super El Nino?
So it's maybe due to climate change.
So what is the climate change effect? Global warming. So basically what is happening right now, what is now the speculation, because again this is a matter of research. The speculation here is that because of higher baseline temperatures, because of the more warm waters, and why? Because of the greater global warming. Because of this, the El Nino has become a Super El Nino. Basically, the ocean waters were even more hot than they were supposed to be. And that, coupled with the El Nino condition, has resulted into a Super El Nino. The effects of El Nino, I am sure you all are a little bit aware of. As there will be warmer waters here, there will be more precipitation in this area, fine, and there will be lesser precipitation towards this side. So what is this part? This is the Indonesian and the Indian subcontinent part, wherein the Indian monsoon will get weakened because of this higher pressure occurring here and lower pressure conditions in the central as well as eastern Pacific. Fine. So this is just the basic framework of Super El Nino. This is a diagram which you all, if ever asked, you need to make regarding Super El Nino. Basically, there is nothing but just more warming of the same area. It is not a greater area that is getting warmed, but it is just the same part of the ocean which is getting warmer than the average temperatures. Fine. You know about all the impacts of El Nino. The super El Nino will have just a more exaggerated way of impact. So if there will be lesser rainfall, the agricultural yields will drop. The reservoirs or the water availability in general in the country will drop even more. Fine. And there will be more rainfall in the western or the eastern part of the Pacific Ocean or the western coast of the South America and those parts. Fine. Now, the next topic that could be asked this year, and that is why I have included this topic, is AMOC, that is Atlantic Meridional Overturning Circulation. Is everyone aware of this? Do you have a basic idea of what is AMOC? Who doesn't have any idea what is AMOC? Don't have any idea. Actually, you all do, but you haven't read it in this way. In your NCRTs, in your physical geography NCRT, you must have read in the oceans unit of it, the oceanic conveyor belt. You must have seen that diagram. That is the AMOC. Now, why is it called the Atlantic Meridional Overturning Circulation? Why are we not calling it the global oceanic conveyor belt here, as we do in the NCRT? Why AMOC? What is special about the Atlantic Ocean? What is the basic difference in the configuration of the Pacific and the Atlantic Ocean? Pressure distribution is on the basis of latitudes. Fine. So that is on the basis of what is the insolation that you're getting. If you're getting greater insolation, you'll have a lower pressure. If there is cooling from above and subsidence of air, you'll get a higher pressure. Think about something regarding its shape.
So maybe there is more irregularity in that.
No, not just irregularity. Although you have the map in front of you, but I'll just clarify it to you. The Pacific is like this. It's horseshoe shaped. There is the North American and the Asian continent which are meeting here, and there is a narrow part which is the Bering Strait. But the Atlantic Ocean is S-shaped and it is open on both sides. So as it is open from both the north and the south, this is the only ocean where the continuous flow from north to south of the globe of the ocean currents can take place. So that is why we're not calling it the Pacific overturning circulation, we're calling it the Atlantic overturning circulation. Even if you've read the topic of ocean water stratification, the salinity diagrams, the thermocline, you will see that all the waters are named after the Atlantic Ocean, North Atlantic bottom water. We don't talk about the Pacific waters. Why? Because these waters have the ability to get intermixed with each other. Now, why this overturning is happening? If you remember your NCRT chapters? Yes, why is this overturning of oceanic circulation happening? What is the basic cause? What is the trend? Why is there a pull effect and why is there a push effect?
Maybe so there is due to temperature.
Yes, correct. The equators have a hotter temperature and the poles have a colder temperature. What happens is at the pole, the water is getting cooler and cooler. As the water is getting cooler, it will start to sink. So as it will sink at the poles, it will now again move towards the warmer areas where there is more and more hotter waters. These hotter waters, they will move towards the cooler areas. So basically the cooling of the waters at the poles and the subsidence is causing basically a pull effect. And now the water is being pulled from the equator towards the poles where it is moving again, and at that point it is again getting cooled, then again getting subsided and then coming back to the equator again and then onwards towards the southern part of the oceans. So there is a constant overturning circulation taking place here. What exactly is it doing? Now this is again also related to one of your NCRT chapters. What is it actually helping maintain? The technical term is the heat budget of the earth. So this will differentiate your answer. Now why am I stressing on this? Because you said temperature distribution, I said heat budget. Now my answer is more geographical and more scientific. And this is the difference that you will see in your mains marks. So you have to talk about the heat budget. It is helping maintain the heat budget of the earth. You have to pick up words from your NCRTs. You have to pick up the concepts from there. See everything, this is a current affairs topic. You will read about this in Down to Earth and everything. But what we are discussing right now is only from the NCRTs. So again, this is the interlinkage, how you interlink the topics. So now what is happening is the heat budget is getting maintained through this flow of water from the top to bottom of the earth. Now what is happening? What is the trend here? What is the trend in the polar areas right now? What is the overall trend that every UPSC question is trying to ask about? Global warming, basically, climate change, human-induced global warming. They'll just try to get that answer out of you, whatever the consequences of it are, whatever the impacts are, and how to tackle it. So what is happening? What area is getting affected the most? Basically the North Pole and the South Pole areas. What is the difference in the characteristics between the northern pole of the earth and the southern pole of the earth in terms of its geography? What is the basic difference?
Northern pole has a more geographical, more landmass area with respect to southern pole.
So if this is the northern pole, so it has more land, not the northern hemisphere, I'm talking about the northern pole. What is the North Pole of the earth? If you go to the North Pole, where do you go? Can you take a flight or a train or anything to the North Pole? Why? Where is it? Geographically, not the magnetic North Pole. 90 degrees north. Where do you think it is? Is it on some country? See, the basic difference is that the North Pole is a sea surrounded by land. Fine. And the South Pole is land, that is Antarctica, surrounded by the sea. So that is why UPSC has its knack of asking questions on the cryosphere, especially on the Arctic, lesser on the Antarctic. Why? Because the Arctic is getting more influence because of this global warming. Why is that? The answer lies in what you said. The sea surrounded by land. Land gets hotter than the sea faster. Why? No. Why? What do you call that? School में सबने पढ़ा होगा. What is that capacity of water? What is that property of water? High specific heat of water. So basically, to heat up 1 degrees of a water molecule or of any unit of water, you require more energy than to heat up a solid. Fine, everyone must have read that in school. This is the basic property. And this correlates with how land becomes hotter faster than the water. Here, the sea has ice, and this is called sea ice. This sea ice has the exact same density as of seawater. This land is getting hotter, and this is melting the sea ice here. The sea ice is getting melted, and the waters are becoming more and more warmer. Fine. What happens with the Antarctica part of things is, Antarctica is land. Land which has ice and glaciers all around it. Those parts are called ice shelves, which are projecting into the sea, and all the glacier landforms are on the landward side of it. This is surrounded by a cold current, and what is that called? Any idea? No. This is called the Antarctic Circumpolar Current. Westwind drift, in some books it might have been written, but the exact current is called Antarctic Circumpolar Current. This is a cold current surrounding the continent of Antarctica. What will it do now? If there is a cold current surrounding this piece of ice, it will protect it. So now the Antarctica part of things will not be as affected with the effects of global warming as the Arctic will be. Kind of anything. मतलब एक चारों ओर आपके, if there is a cold layer surrounding you, you will remain cold, na. But there, the same thing is not happening. There is a hot layer around you. So you will see more and more, sea ice melting. You will see images of polar bears in the North Pole areas, but you will not see many of the images from the Antarctica part. You will hear of a massive iceberg or an ice shelf that is going into the sea, but you will not hear about many of these events. There will be very rarely these events that will be happening. But in the Arctic, you will hear more and more of Arctic heat waves. You will hear more of permafrost melting, that is permanently frozen ground, which is now melting. But you will not hear of such things in the Antarctic as much. Why? Because it is insulated. Now, this warming of those waters, these waters which were actually getting cold and cooler and then getting subsided, now these waters are not getting that much cold. So the pull effect that is being created by these cold waters, that will reduce. So what will happen now? If the pull effect that is happening from the North Pole, that was normally happening because of global warming, that is getting weakened. So what will be the overall impact on the Earth? What will get disturbed? The heat budget of the Earth will get disturbed. The Earth will again get more and more, imbalance in terms of its energy distribution. So that the multi-dimensional effects of this can definitely be asked in the next couple of years. So now you have to link it with whatever you know about the global climate. So where can we link this? This weakening of this whole ocean heat conveyor belt, what are the various components around the Atlantic Ocean that we can link it with? Think about it. From the climate perspective of it. If you can remember the map of the Earth, this is the Indian Ocean, this is the whole African subcontinent, North America, South America, fine. This is the whole European part of things. This is Indonesia, Australia, fine. This is getting weakened. So what are these areas of the Earth that will get affected? Air mass formation will get affected. What else will get affected? No, first think from a climate perspective. Don't think from a human geography perspective. Climate perspective, say what will be affected? Rains where? Where rains will be affected? Which areas? Like the Indian subcontinent. Fine. Like in the Saharan or the sub-Saharan areas. So you know that the monsoon is not restricted only to India, right? There is a monsoon in the west coast of US as well, near Mexico. It is not as long-lived as the Indian monsoon. There are monsoon winds here as well in the African subcontinent. There is a monsoon which is prominent in the Indian subcontinent as well, and there is a monsoon in the East Asia as well, the East Asian monsoon. Monsoon is basically what? A system of reversing winds, where wind direction constantly reverses in a few months. Why that would happen? It will definitely be linked with the movement of sun or the apparent movement of the sun over the Earth. So as the sun's direct insolation will shift, the low pressure areas will shift, and so will the convergence of the wind systems, and then the wind systems will reverse after some time as the sun will shift. So we're not getting into that, but definitely that monsoon will be affected. Why? Because the monsoon itself is also linked with, for example, here, the occurrence of the monsoon is linked with a high pressure system called Mascarene High. So there is a high pressure here and the low pressure here because of the heating of the land here, which is Tibetan Plateau. So this caused the intensity of the monsoon. So if there will not be a higher pressure here because the water is not as cold, so now it will lead to the weakening of monsoon over the Indian subcontinent. What will happen over Western Europe? Western Europe will become more and more cold. Why? Because the warmer waters are not getting attracted as well as they were before towards the west coast of Europe. So Western Europe will see intense cooling. The monsoonal areas of the African subcontinent, Indian subcontinent will see a disruption in the monsoon. And there will be certain effects on the Southern Ocean as well, where again the heat budget will get imbalanced, and then there will be hotter parts of the ocean now after that. So a weakening of the AMOC has been in news over many years now. It's not a new piece of news for at least geography optional students, but for other environment or ecology, people who follow the current affairs, they will see this in the last 1 year in the Down to Earth and other, sources as well. So this could be asked in your exam, and you have to just, again, what we did, we just tried to extract information from what we knew. You can layer this now with some of these, whatever is being given in these, latest reports or documents. So they're talking about all the tipping elements. Basically, these are irreversible things that AMOC, once it slows down, it will be a global tipping element. So tipping element means something that is irreversible, which will cause irreversible change in the world's global climate cycle. So these tipping elements linked to the AMOC weakening are the Indian summer monsoon, which will be impacted, the Sahel or the West African monsoon, the melting of the West Antarctic ice sheet, the Amazon rainforest will have greater heat, and this will lead to either becoming more and more dry, and then overall leading to the cooling of the Western European part of the the European continent. So these things you will need to link in your answer, and this is something that you need to follow.
How will Western Antarctic sheet get melted?
See, again, overall, this, if the waters are not as cold here, then when they will move in a subterranean way towards the southern ocean, they will not be as cold there also. So the Antarctic circumpolar current will be weakened, and the bottom waters will not be as cold as they should be. Now the other linkages will follow regarding the fishing and all. So what happens in terms of fishing? What is the basic requirement for a healthy fishing area? What does current do? What do they do? Basically nutrients. See, fish require food. What is their food? That is called something called phytoplanktons and zooplanktons. What do they require? They require nutrients in the water. What happens is that the nutrients are basically some solid particles, and the solid particles will tend to settle. Where they will settle? They will settle with the colder waters. So the cold water is nutrient rich. Now this cold water needs to come up to the surface so that the fisheries can sustain themselves. Why? Because the fish cannot survive in the greater depths because there is no light there. So again, most of the fisheries will be in the photic zone of the oceans. That requires some nutrient rich waters. Nutrient rich waters can only, or the colder waters, how will they come up? They will require some space. For example, in the case of upwelling, when there are winds, for example, if this is the land area and there are winds towards the sea, what will happen? These warm waters, due to the sunlight, these waters are warm, and because of the effect of land, they will move, this warm water will move away from the land. So this creates a space, and then again the cooler waters from below will come up. This whole cyclicity will get affected. The waters again are not as cool, so the fisheries will get affected because again they will not be as nutrient rich, and upwelling will get weakened in many of the areas. So you have to first begin from a physical geography standpoint and build whatever you know towards human geography, and then whatever aspects of human geography, fishing, transport, whatever you can link it with. Okay. All those linkages are given in your material, but you just need to understand the process here. So basically, the climate change induced melting of Greenland's ice sheet has added around 5,000 cubic kilometers of fresh water here, and the fresh water is again less saline, more warm, and that is leading to the weakening of the overall Atlantic meridional overturning circulation. Why meridional? Because it is moving from north to south and south to north along the meridians. So this is the Atlantic meridional overturning. Why? Because again, at one point it is going down and at the other point it is coming up. So this is the overturning, and it's a whole circulation system. So this was the AMOC. These two topics you will need to understand and have just a basic information about, have some points regarding it, and you can also use it. If there is any question on climate change, then both of these act as good examples. Super El Nino as well as AMOC, you can quote in any of your answers regarding the impacts of climate change. Super El Nino is again because of global warming, and then AMOC weakening is also because of the same cause as the Super El Nino. So the causes remain the same, and we will always attribute or try to attribute it to anthropogenic emissions of greenhouse gases. That is what UPSC examiner is basically trying to get out of you, that you can attribute it to human activities. You can attribute it to industrial revolution, you can attribute it to some sort of capitalistic activities. And then what will your way forward will be? It will be based on sustainable development. You will not talk about the cessation or the ending of greenhouse gases. We will talk about something like climate justice, wherein the developing countries should be allowed to move ahead with the greenhouse gas emissions. The developed countries should stop that, and overall we have to adapt to climate change. We'll see in the future topics all of these things. just have to get your setting regarding the exam right. Fine. There are certain initiatives, basically they're only for monitoring. Like there is an initiative called Rapid Mocha. What it is doing, it is monitoring at around 26° north in the Atlantic Ocean. It is monitoring how the speed and the temperature of the ocean currents is. So basically those initiatives are given in your material, and then way forward, what will be way forward for commonly for Super El Nino as well as AMOC? Fine, but you have to break it down. Now, give me 3-4 way forwards. See, there is a general question on climate change. For example, if it is on Super El Nino, AMOC, you have to give a way forward. What will be your way forward commonly? Don't give me any specific initiatives or anything. Just give me a common way forward. How do you generate that?
So related to greenhouse gases, we should focus on elimination of the greenhouse gases which have most lifespan.
ठीक है, one part is this, elimination of greenhouse gases, that is tackling at the source level. Anything else that can be done, you can think of as a common measure against it.
So first is this is elimination, and second will be any sort of
Huh?
preventive measures.
Like?
Already knowing the
Awareness
program and
Awareness is not right here. Awareness वहाँ पे होती है जहाँ पे mining का कोई tribals में awareness होती है, not adaptation is at a country level. अभी awareness वाले ही realm में you have to stay there. Get into a better, just figure out a better term, more scientific. Awareness is not scientific. What is scientific? See, more and more research. ठीक है? More and more research and development. This is a common way forward that you can use. There is something called MRV. Okay? MRV, monitoring, reporting and verification of the whatever parameters. For example, for Super El Nino, for AMOC, you have to monitor it. Okay, you need to know the data. You have to do some modeling, research and development and verify all that data. So monitoring, research and verification, a common way forward. Then firstly, you talked about the source, tackling the climate change or the greenhouse gas emissions. So you have to figure out common way forwards and common challenges for all of these things. Then only will you be able to do your mains preparation well. Now more and more things will follow. Now you will talk about, something like climate justice or carbon trading or stuff like that. Whatever you know, you have to use it to generate your answer. You don't have to generate every answer. You have to know just 20% things, recycle them at 80% places. So if you know about carbon credit trading or whatever, you can use that here. You can talk about multi-stakeholder approach and keeping into account the indigenous and local tribal communities, especially for example in the Atlantic Ocean or the small island states, because they will be the first ones affected. So you have to learn to generate these dimensions. UPSC examiners want you to think, about the poorest of the poor or whatever is the most basic stuff that you can do. Fine. We'll not get into the details. These are just some of the common way forwards. Fine. Let's move on to the next topic.
So will it have positive implications somewhere else?
There could be positive implications, but again, these effects are irreversible. Irreversible effects will definitely cause climate change, and that climate change is going to affect who is going to get affected if there is a flood in Delhi right now. Are we going to get affected first here in this classroom? Who is going to get homeless first? Who is living in the floodplains, and the poorest of the poor people, the squatters or the slum dwellers, whatever you want to call them, they are living there. So again, even if there is a positive effect, there will be a negative effect somewhere, and that will displace someone. And that is something called climate refugees, which is again in use. So you have to take into account that. There are there is one more interesting thing that they have proposed, and many of the researchers have proposed, is geoengineering, that is closing of the Bering Strait. Close hi kar do, so there is no such warming effect into the AMOC. So you can quote some of these long-term, scientific measures as well. So now you have to follow this. Anything regarding Arctic, anything regarding AMOC, global warming, ocean warming, high sea surface temperatures, these are common themes that UPSC asks. And now you have to collect information over the next year. And for main students, Whatever is given here should be sufficient for you if you can revise it in the time. Fine. So basically, what we can say now, let me just clarify the approach here right now in the beginning as well. There are two approaches to tackle the problem of climate change. What are the two approaches? Adaptation and mitigation. What is mitigation? Kind of. Ki rok do, ki you stop the water from getting flooded. But can you really stop the sea surface temperatures to, getting elevated? Can you stop sea level rise? Is there a logical, rational solution, or there is a way for that? No. So what we are left with is adaptation. Even if there is, it requires something which we have less of, that is money. Why? Because we are a developing country. At least from an Indian perspective, we have to divert our funds more into welfare. We have to uplift, the millions of people out of the socio-economic indicators we are very, backward at, for example. So we cannot invest so much in, stopping a lot of things. We cannot suddenly transition if someone tells you that you change all your vehicles and all your home air conditioning from a non-renewable source to a renewable source. You won't be able to do it at once, right? It will not be financially possible for most of you. So we cannot do that. What we can do is we can adapt. What is adaptation? How do you adapt? If there is a flood here, for example, every year there's a flood in ORN. How do you adapt?
Build structure which is friendly and
जापान सिस्टम की earthquake बहुत ज़्यादा आ रहा है तो उन्होंने अपने पूरा structure
kind of something like that, है ना? Or you maybe develop amphibious vehicles कि आपकी स्कूटी में jet ski बन जाए. But literally, this is adaptation. That we cannot stop this. तो हम क्या करेंगे? What will, if a place is flooding every year, we will only adapt, or we will move out. So even moving out is adaptation. That we are not trying to tackle it. We are not trying to stop it. Even what Japan is doing, that is more of mitigation. That we are not going to, change our way of living. We are going to change the building. But can we change every building? Can we change every road? No. So we will adapt. We will move out the higher density. We will move out of the high density areas. Simple. We will ensure that there are lesser people here, that there is no library that is going on in the basement, no classes in the basement. What is that? That is adaptation. What Japan did is more of mitigation. If they figured out a way to make the basement safer or to make these buildings safer, that is mitigation. But if we moving out to other places, if we are focusing on online education, that is adaptation. India will always go for adaptation. Fine. So we will not go for much of mitigation. Why? Because mitigation requires money and we want to divert money into welfare. Simple. This will be reflected in all your answers, even in any of the questions that you will understand when you will look at the questions. That is what they want you to answer. What should be the approach? They will give you, in ethics, they will give you a conflict between mitigation and adaptation. They will check it in all the papers, whether you are following this approach or not. So we are going for adaptation at this point of time. We cannot afford to, but we want the developed world to go for this. We want Germany, we want the industrialized nations to stop fossil fuel emissions, keep the fossil fuels in the ground. But we will continue using fossil fuels. We will not say that, okay, we will phase it out by 2070. We are expecting them to phase it out by 2030. And even phasing it out by 2070 is not a target that we have declared legally. We'll look at that now in the next section. Fine, the next topic is UNFCCC COP30. Every couple of years, there is a question on UNFCCC in the mains paper. Fine. Last year, there was a question on COP26. This year, there was COP30. UNFCCC is a framework convention on climate change. This is basically the overarching international climate law. There is a meeting every year of all the parties which are parties to this convention, which is called Conference of Parties. So this was the 30th Conference of Parties. Now, 2015 was a landmark year wherein the overall framework regarding climate change got shifted. Before that, we were focusing on stopping the greenhouse gas emissions. We were trying to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. We were not trying to target global warming. But after 2015, in 2015, we passed the Paris Climate Agreement. So Paris Climate Agreement is completing 10 years. That's why this year for 2026, it becomes an important topic. Next year, maybe not so much, but you have to follow it. And I'm just telling you the way to follow it. So Paris Climate Agreement now focuses on the global warming. Now we're talking about the temperature. Earlier, we were going for the greenhouse gases. So there is a transition from greenhouse gases now to the global warming. And we're linking now global warming to the climate change rather than just focusing on greenhouse gas emissions. For that, the Paris Climate Agreement was passed and it had a 5-year review mechanism. So every 5 years, there was supposed to be a review. So the 26th Conference of Parties was the first review after 5 years. It occurred in 2021. And 2026 will be the second review. So COP31 is going to be very important because COP26 already has had 2 or 3 questions. And why only COP26? Because it was the first 5-year review. And at every point of 5 years, there will be a change in the targets, whatever every country is targeting to, reduce the global warming impact. For that, the mechanism is called NDCs. I'm sure you all are aware of that. What are NDCs? Nationally determined contributions. Basically, these are voluntary targets that every country will propose that we will target to do this to tackle this problem of global warming. These targets are only declared. They are not legally meant to be followed. There is no obligation on any country. If they don't follow this or they don't achieve this, there is no legal obligation. So, this was the basic framework behind Paris Climate Agreement. This agreement has multiple articles as well. There was an article as last year, Article 6. What is that regarding? No, Article 6 is about carbon markets. So this agreement has multiple articles and provisions. Some of them are important for your exam. For example, Article 6 is very important for your exam. There are multiple provisions regarding the exchange of carbon credits and stuff like that. Fine, we'll see that later. But first, we'll focus on the COP30. COP30, it occurred in Belém in Brazil. There were certain decisions that were taken that you need to follow, and you have to remember that next year there will be a review on what was done in the second cycle of the Paris Agreement. The first cycle was from 2016 to 21. The second cycle was from 2021 to 26. So you please follow COP31, and for this year, you look at what was done in COP30. So this meeting had a few decisions that were made here. Firstly, there was a tropical forest forever facility made, basically giving funds to the indigenous people who live in the rainforest. So basically, this COP had this major development, the tropical forest forever facility. Next year, you can expect a question in the prelims very easily from this. So it establishes a forest investment fund with 20% payment to indigenous people and local communities, trusteed by the World Bank. Next, there is the Belém mission to 1.5 degrees. That is it is a basic platform where what is the target of the Paris Climate Agreement? To tackle or to keep the global warming under 1.5 degrees centigrade from the pre-industrial levels. So what we're going to target here is to keep this goal alive. And for this, the Troika, that is the previous chairman of the COP, the current chairman and the next chairman of the COP, they all will work together to create this platform. Next is the Baku to Belém roadmap to $1.3 trillion. Under the Paris Climate Agreement, now we'll come to the Paris Climate Agreement and the important articles that you should know. So, Paris Climate Agreement, Article 6, this talks about carbon markets. Within this, 6.2, 6.4 and 6.8. 6.2 talks about country to country interchange of carbon credits. We'll see what carbon credits are, but basically these are units of carbon dioxide emissions that you can sell. For example, if I'm not emitting, if I'm emitting less carbon dioxide than your unit or your factory, then I have a carbon credit over you. There is a limit of what everyone can go for. If I am below that limit, so I have those many carbon credits. If I'm 10 units below the limit, then I have 10 carbon credits. And if you have crossed that unit, that means you have to purchase those carbon credits from me. Okay, so this under Article 6.2 is done between country to country. This Article 6 was finalized in COP 29 and it was asked last year. So it was done, finalized in 2024, asked in 2025 prelims. That is why it was asked if anyone has a question. 6.4 talks about a centralized sort of international registry of carbon credits. These are called emission reduction units, ERUs, which are with the Paris Climate Agreement body. So this you can purchase directly from the, the Secretariat of the Paris Climate Agreement. This is country to country trade. 6.8 talks about non-market mechanisms. Here there is no sale and purchase of carbon credits. Here there is investment. So for example, X country will invest in the phasing out of or afforestation, suppose, to increase the carbon sink of Y country. So we are not purchasing carbon credits from anyone. We are directly investing into another country to ensure that they are able to meet their decarbonization targets. Fine. So these are the Article 6 mechanisms. The other article that you need to focus on is Article 9. Article 9 of the Paris Agreement, this talks about the financing mechanism. It says that there is a mandate that developed countries must help finance the developing countries to carry out this decarbonization. Fine. So this gives a mandate on the developed countries to carry out, to help the developing countries, the poorer countries, to carry out decarbonization. This is where India focuses on. So any of the questions which focus on India's climate policy, we will talk about Article 9, that India wants this article to be followed in letter and spirit. So to meet the demands of the Article 9, which is a legal mandate under the Paris Climate Agreement, there was something called the non-quantifiable collective goal. So this is basically a collective goal that was net quantifiable collective goal that was mandated by the Article 9 of Paris Agreement. This says that every year the developed countries will contribute $300 billion till 2035 to the developing countries. Fine. So the developed countries have this legal obligation of $300 billion per year. The main contention is that countries like India, developing countries, they say that this is too less. What is actually required is $1.3 trillion per year. And that is what we want. So that is why this COP was important, because there was this Baku to Belém roadmap which was adopted, which talks about official pathway to mobilize a new collective quantified goal of $1.3 trillion per year by 2035. And to triple the adaptation finance, we talked about mitigation and adaptation. So we want the adaptation finance to be tripled to $120 billion per year. So this was a win for India. In a way, this COP was very positive for India, because many of the things were related to adaptation, and also this NCQG was, targeted to at least be elevated to what we require it to be. $300 billion is too less. So that is what we keep on arguing and negotiating at these conferences. Next, a global goal on adaptation, where 59 concrete indicators across 7 sectors were, declared that we will quantitatively measure this to know that if we are meeting the global goal on adaptation or not. So adaptation measure was, again another adaptation measure was adopted here. That is why India called it a COP of adaptation. So if there is any question on COP29 or anything, you have to remember this word, COP on adaptation, because many of these things are related to adaptation.
So ऐसा adaptation को define करना, जैसे अपन mitigation को तो define कर दिया,
हाँ,
adaptation का definition क्या होगा?
adaptation का definition आप you can think about it yourself. Example के बारे में सोचो. Adapting is just believing that climate change is inevitable and we have to adapt to it. So we will move out and you give me funds to help create a new city somewhere. For example, if there is a slum in Mumbai, ठीक है, and Mumbai is projected to be getting eroded at some rate, and after a few 10-20 years 1 meter of Mumbai will be submerged near the coastline. So adaptation means that you will give me the funds to help create another community living society or complex or housing society at a higher ground. Mitigation would mean you would help create a sea wall in front of me so that the sea does not affect me, or you will help me stabilize the ground. So think of it from an example point of view. Many of these things are not defined. For example, terrorism is not defined. Why? Because we want it to have a very expansive definition. If we define all of these things legally, then that definition will restrict many of the actions. So adaptation and all, usually they do not have very specific definitions. The examples should be clear to you.
$120 billion per year वाला क्या था?
ये adaptation finance के लिए है. So we want it to be tripled to 120. अभी $40 billion per year is the right now the current target. So 40 billion for adaptation and the rest for mitigation. And this same ratio you will see in disaster management as well. In our country, the total funding for disaster management, 20% is for mitigation. There is called a National Disaster Mitigation Fund. Fine. And then the rest of it is for adaptation. So you have to understand that every climate fund is divided into this mitigation efforts and adaptation efforts. Right now, the ratio is more towards mitigation than adaptation, but we will constantly keep trying to increase the funds for adaptation. But just try to understand the trends of things. Fine. The examples will keep changing every year. So these are the various initiatives under this. India, anything regarding India and climate change, you have to remember these keywords: equity, climate justice, CBDRRC. CBDRRC, everyone is clear? Common but differentiated responsibilities. And what is RC? As per respective capabilities. मतलब कि जो जितना कर पाए, whoever can do how much, you do that. So if India has capability to only do X amount, the agreement says that you have to do X plus 20, but our capability is to only do X. So we will do X. So it's the whole responsibility is common regarding climate change, but differentiated. And how is it differentiated? According to mine and your capability. If my capability is more, then I will do more. If yours is less, you will do less. So this is what India talks about. Similar thing is equity and climate or environmental justice. Environmental justice is the same thing. Just give us money, funds and support so that there is justice, there is equity. You remember that diagram about equity, na? This. So the taller guy is on a lower platform and the shorter guy is on a higher platform. This is equity and this is what we want. Give us a bigger platform. That is it. And that is what the developed countries, they say that we are a developed economy. They say we are the third, fourth largest economy. So the whole contention is about that we don't want to be called a highly developed economy. We want to be recognized as a developing country with our own socio-economic problems, and we need support regarding that. So India said that it declared that the COP must be the COP of adaptation. It welcomed something called the Just Transition Mechanism. Again, it is another mechanism to help ensure that the transition is just. This is also called the Belém Action Mechanism. It's given in your notes. So Belém Action Mechanism is again about just transition, that the funds should be allocated in a way that there is justice. The poorer people, they get more and more funds. In simple words. Fine. Article 9.1, India is now focusing on. So now the next article that UPSC will focus on is Article 9.1. So Article 6 हो गया. अब आर्टिकल 6 पे के बाद 9 पे आएंगे. So just make sure that you know about it. Now we talked about NDCs, the nationally determined contributions. They are reviewed every 5 years. The latest development is that the third set of NDCs. Every 5 years there is a review cycle. First one was 2021 to 26. Then this is the 2030 target, the second cycle, and now we are coming to the third cycle. So we have set out the targets. I hope everyone is clear that there was something called Panchamrit goals. We talked about net zero by 2070, but that is not our NDC. Not everything is NDC. NDC are what we are declaring. We will do this. Even if we don't, no one can do anything, but we are at least legally declaring it. Panchamrit is our commitment, but nothing on paper. That is just our philosophy. So mission life, lifestyle for environment, or net zero by 2070. This is part of Panchamrit. That is not NDC. NDCs are only these three. First is emission intensity cut. Secondly, non-fossil fuel installed power capacity. And third is additional carbon sink. What is emission intensity?
So it is calculated with respect to CO2. When how much amount of CO2 is released when 1 ton of carbon dioxide is burned.
CO2 and carbon dioxide burn same चीज हो गई?
When a significant amount of fuel is burned.
नहीं, it's not about fuel exactly. Emission intensity is about, emission means how much carbon dioxide or anything was emitted. ठीक है? Could be carbon dioxide, nitrogen also is emitted. That is also a big problem. But suppose we talk about carbon dioxide. Emission intensity is how much emission is done while 1 unit of production is being done. So emission could be 100 gigatons of carbon dioxide. But if I'm also producing 100 units from that, then the emission intensity is what? 1. But for example, if I'm producing only 1 unit of something and that is causing 100 gigatons of carbon dioxide emission, then what is the emission intensity? भाई 100 ऊपर in the numerator, नीचे 1, तो 100 हो गई कि हमने we spent out 100 gigatons of carbon dioxide and only produced 1 unit. But whereas someone else, they made 100 units of the same thing and they emitted 100 gigatons of carbon dioxide, then your emission intensity is 1. So we will never talk about emission. We will always talk about emission intensity. Why? Because production has to be green. So we want to make it more and more sustainable. So we will try that 1 unit of whatever we produce, that emits lesser and lesser carbon dioxide. And this is what our target is, to cut this emission intensity from 2005 levels to 47% of what it was in 2005. So for example, we were producing something in 2005, 1 unit, which was giving out 100 units of emission. So the target is to now reduce it to 47. So now when we'll produce the same thing, only 47 units should be emitted. So we have to reduce it by 47%. Right now, 36% of emission intensity cut has been achieved. This is the status around 2020. What will happen next year? Till next year, this data will be updated. So now you should mark this in your copies that this will be the point for you to follow. Then non-fossil fuel installed power capacity. There are two things. One is installed capacity, one is generation. So what is the difference in generation and installed capacity? What do you think is installed capacity? क्या होगा? कि I have a plant which can produce 100 gigawatts of electricity. ठीक है. And what is actually producing is the power generation. So for example, what is the total power generated by the percentage of power generated by coal in India? कोई idea है? Largely में कितना है? 73% of all the electricity generated is by coal. Power generated or electricity generated, ठीक है? But what is the installed capacity of renewable energy in the country? और कोल की installed capacity, total installed capacity में कितनी होगी? That is only around 40%. तो 40 हमारी total installed capacity is suppose 1 lakh gigawatts. Out of that, only 40% is coal, but it is producing 70% of electricity. Whereas for non-fossil fuels, that is renewable energy, target was 50%. Now the new target is for 2036 or 2035 is 60%, and we've already achieved 52% installed capacity. So अब जो issue आ रहा है, मतलब what you should focus on is the gap. कि why is 52% of installed capacity only giving around 20% of energy? क्या issue होगा? What will be the issue? Why? इतने solar plants लग रहे हैं, but then why are they not contributing in 52% in the same proportion? What would be the issue?
Lack of infrastructure.
What infrastructure? Because see, this is where, हाँ,
Transmitting the infrastructure.
थोड़ा सा exact देखो, this is the basic difference. आपके आंसर्स में यही आएगा. आपने कहा lack of infrastructure and lack of transmission ability. Someone will write lack of battery storage capacity, lack of grid integration. नंबर हल्का सा ज़्यादा मिल गया, हल्का सा नंबर यहाँ भी मिला, करेक्ट बात थी, बट स्पेसिफिक नहीं थी. सो यू ट्राई टू यूज स्पेसिफिक वर्ड्स. ग्रिड इंटीग्रेशन है ना. होता क्या है, व्हाट इज द प्रॉब्लम विद रिन्यूएबल एनर्जी? इट इज नॉट कंटिन्यूअस. कोल तो इफ आई पुट इन द बॉयलर एंड इन द फर्नेस इट विल कीप बर्निंग ना, इट विल प्रोड्यूस स्टीम and the turbine will move, electricity will be produced. But what is with solar energy? Till the time there is sunlight, direct sunlight, there will be production of energy. Rest of the times, there will not be any production. So at night, no solar energy is being produced. But in the summers, when is the peak demand? During nights, for air conditioning and cooling purposes, for example. So what is needed? For that energy to be stored. And that requires battery capacity and storage capacity. So that is why we are focusing so much on critical minerals and all these, supply chain and all these partnerships, so that we have these minerals or we have these battery capacity storage technologies. And then we can integrate the grid of the renewable energy with the non-renewable energy. So we need to ensure that there is grid integration. Otherwise, there is solar energy that is being produced, but that is getting wasted. Because we are not able to harness it. Bas. This is true with wind, this is true with hydel, any renewable energy source, none of them are continuous. ठीक है? So this was the basic framework that you must understand. ये भी figures हैं, these are the numbers, just read them up. ये वैसे भी आपके time तक they will get updated, so you don't have to worry. These are the basic schemes, these are the measures that have been taken for us to achieve these NDCs. ठीक है? Green hydrogen mission, Surya Ghar Muft Bijli Yojana, what is that? That we're trying to have household level solar, panels that can help pull down at least the, electricity bills. Again, there are two types of solar panels if you have them at home. One is linked to the grid and one are off grid. So one, they can feed back to the power grid, but others are only which can feed to your house. So that is the problem. We have to integrate them with the grid. That is the bigger advantage. Fine. Now again, anything regarding renewable energy, what will be the common constraint? Don't try to look at specifics. Think about topic. क्या होगा? Renewable energy आपके घर में लानी है. What will be the first hurdle? Financial issue. ठीक है. Second issue क्या होगा? Space तो ठीक है. Space का थोड़ा सा और better word आप use कर लो. नहीं, space से ज़्यादा technology will be the bigger issue. The bigger issue will be technology. You don't have that advanced technology right now. ठीक है? Supply chain vulnerabilities. We do not produce it ourselves. We do not have the raw materials, the minerals for that. Fine. So these will be common for any renewable energy thing. The capacity generation gap we talked about. That there is a gap in installed capacity in generation. Storage issues. Land and resource constraints. Solar power plants require great amounts of land. ठीक है, कहाँ से इतना आएगा? And then global implementation gaps again. Global level पे we need some integration. That is why there are certain initiatives. We have a solar alliance with France. That from France and India there should be grid integration. One Earth, One Sun initiative. One world, one grid. Fine. अब way forward again will क्या होगा? We need funds. Where will we get it from? Paris Agreement, basically we UNFCCC, हमारे जो भी global financing mechanisms हैं, जो भी example you can remember, just transition mechanism, there are various such mechanisms, clean technology fund framework, है ना? any green climate fund, whatever funds now you will see what to follow in current affairs. ऐसा कोई भी climate fund, you need to at least know about it. ठीक है, what is the fund about? Who manages it? For example, this fund is, the trustee is World Bank, Clean Technology Fund Framework. So you now have to follow these funds whenever they're in news. Then we have to go for battery storage technologies. So there is a PLI, Production Linked Incentive Scheme for advanced chemistry cells. So what are advanced chemistry cells? Well, lithium ion batteries, sodium ion batteries, any advanced chemistry cells are, apart from the electrolytic batteries that we use in the torches and all, are the advanced chemistry cells. Advantage is again what? There is a greater storage capacity. There is a greater energy capacity. There are greater number of cycles of charge and recharge that they can go through. Phone mein everyone has that, na? The number of cycles that your battery has gone through. You can count that. And every battery has a limited capacity. So for that, we need more and more research and development and funds. And again, we can bridge the capacity generation gap by promoting hybrid systems, wherein solar and wind, suppose, are co-located. Example or a case study that you can use is Khavda Renewable Energy Park. This is in Kutch. It has the potential, or the plan is to create 30 gigawatts of power from here. 26 will be solar, 4 will be wind. And it is all on degraded marshland, around 580 kilometers squares, 5 times the size of Paris, and larger than Mumbai. So that is what we are going to try. We are going to convert the degraded land into such renewable energy parks, wherever the potential is high. Fine, so these were the international COP-related developments in your second topic. Let's move on quickly. We'll talk about now carbon markets. We have covered some of these things now, so I'll not go to get into much of the background. But again, the basic idea is that carbon dioxide or carbon is a greenhouse gas. It will cause global warming, so we have to limit its production. For that, there are certain mechanisms, because there is inevitability of production. If steel is getting produced, then you cannot suddenly produce it without coal. It will require some years. So that means if you establish a limit, then someone will breach the limit. Others might not breach that limit. So what we can do? We can give money to those people who are not breaching that, to help them compensate and help them, advance their own capabilities. In a way, we're paying a fine. But we're not calling it a fine, we're calling it a purchase. For example, if you suppose you cause a motor accident on the road, unfortunately, but instead of a penalty, you're being asked to purchase something called a road safety bond. You purchase the road safety bond for 10,000 rupees. So that is what? It's just a fine, because you violated road safety. But now you're calling it an investment here. That is it. Why? Because we do not want to penalize this. Because without the emission of carbons, there will be lesser development. Development also needs to be cheap. We cannot have a great cost of it. So this is just a way to incentivize people. The basic changes that have come over the last year is something called the greenhouse gas emission intensity target rules that have come into force. Overall framework wise, there are certain options regarding carbon instruments for the carbon trade. One is the emission trading system, that there is a cap on whatever is being emitted. You can only emit 100 gigatons of carbon dioxide. So there is an absolute cap on the emissions. Then there is something called carbon tax. For example, in Singapore, Sweden, there are taxes on how much carbon you are producing. If you are producing X amount of carbon, then you will give that much of tax. And that can be calculated based on the carbon content of whatever fuel you're using and stuff like that. There are proxies to calculate that. Next is carbon crediting mechanisms that are under the Article 6 of Paris Agreement. We talked about the Paris Agreement mechanisms. We are all a signatory of it. So that is why we operationalized the Carbon Credit Trading Scheme in 2022. This was done under the Electricity Conservation Amendment Act. So you need to remember this act for prelims. The CCTS was under the Energy Conservation Act. ठीक है? Following यहाँ तक? No, any issues?
Do we have to follow it covers some specific industry, for example?
Yes. Now there are few things here. There are multiple ways of trading carbon credits. So firstly is this, the carbon credit trading scheme. This is for obligated entities. These cover a certain set of industries. I think I've written in the next section. So this is for certain specific set of 8 to 9 types of industries. Fine, that they have to undertake this carbon credit trade because of there is a cap on the emission intensity. For in India, we are trying to cap the emission intensity. So we talked about a few things now. We talked about the emission trading scheme, where there was an overall cap. There is a carbon credit trading scheme or the carbon markets under Article 6 of PCA. What was India's approach before this? Before this Article 6 came into operation, we were focusing on energy efficiency reductions. So this sort of carbon trade was occurring on the basis of how much energy efficient our production was. For that, the Bureau of Energy Efficiency used to rate industries. You are this much energy efficient, so you are below the limit. Someone is above that limit, so again they will have to pay you indirectly. So this was what was our approach. Now we are moving on to this carbon credit trading scheme. This is now about emission intensity. So we have moved from energy efficiency to emission intensity. This is the basic change in our approach. Just know that. So under this was by Bureau of Energy Efficiency and UPSC under Energy Conservation Act. There is an intensity-based baseline and credit mechanism. Obligated industrial entities are assigned annual GEI targets, greenhouse emission intensity targets. Now these have been operationalized under the 2025 rules. So that was the act. These are the rules to identify and to quantify those targets and to make them, in force. So basically, this dictates how much carbon they can emit per unit of production rather than setting a hard cap on the total emission units, and they can trade these on the basis of who has more and who has less. So this is the basic framework. We talked about Article 6 of Paris Agreement and the new rules. This is the 2026 mains people, they need to definitely look at it. The GI rules expansion added 4 new sectors: petroleum refinery, petrochemicals, textiles and secondary aluminium to the previous list. Previously it was aluminium, cement, chloralkali, pulp and paper. These are the categories of industries that were earlier mandated to follow the scheme. Now it has been expanded to this. July 2026, there is a new draft this month. They want iron and steel industry to be included. Iron and steel is one of the biggest emitters of greenhouse gas emissions. So if this is included, then it will be a very positive step. The idea is to reduce the greenhouse gas emission intensity by 3 to 7% by 26 to 27, and the levels that they're taking it from are 2023 to 2024. This is the basic change in the rules. Fine. Again, not failing to meet these, these carbon credit certificates, that will lead to a fine twice the average of the trading price, which will be enforced by CPCB, that is the Central Pollution Control Board. So there will be a fine. There is now a legal mechanism that will be undertaken if you do not do it, if you violate the limit and if you do not purchase these units. Fine. Again, कर सकती हैं. वही, that is the whole point. You have to trade this. Na? I will give you money. You give me carbon credit because I violated my limit. That is the whole idea. Now, अब ये सारी चीज़ें प्रीलिम्स के लिए इंपॉर्टेंट है. इंडियन कार्बन मार्केट इसको CCTS के थ्रू आ रहा है, which is administrator is Bureau of Energy Efficiency, regulator is Central Electricity Regulatory Commission, registry is Grid Controller of India, and it operates on a cap and trade model. 1 carbon credit certificate equals 1 ton of CO2 equivalent. So 1 ton CO2 equivalent per unit production अगर आपने किया, so that equates to 1 carbon credit certificate. Now, अब ये बात थी between industries. Now comes the whole ecosystem or all the stakeholders are not just industry, na? We are also stakeholders. So to include other people, there is something called the Green Credit Program. ठीक है? Anyone aware of the Green Credit Program? क्या difference है CCTS and Green Credit Program में? Green credit program is voluntary. The regulator is the regulatory body is different. It is again a market-based mechanisms under the Environmental Protection Act this time, and it is to incentivize voluntary actions. For example, afforestation. For example, anything that is being produced sustainably. For example, if you are doing water conservation, then you get a green credit for that. For that, the administrative body is the Indian Council of Forestry Research and Education. So that was by the Bureau of Energy Efficiency, and under the Electricity Amendment Act, Conservation Act, this is under the Environmental Protection Act for individuals and anyone. You, I, anyone can do that. Fine. So for water conservation, sustainable agriculture, waste management, etc., you can get the green credits. And under this, a dynamic land bank was generated where degraded land was put into this. So if you have to purchase a green credit or if you have to utilize it, then you can do afforestation in that degraded land. So there is a land bank, okay, there is a land here which is degraded, you carry out afforestation there and you get a green credit for that. Now you can sell that or anyone can purchase that from the state forest departments. So basically this is for private companies, individuals, anyone who wants to do it voluntarily. Ab disme there are a few changes this year. There was certain problem here in this whole system. The problem was that the norms were a little easy. That it was about if you could plant some number of trees, then you get a green credit. Or if the duration for growing that tree or for marking that tree to be legitimized or verified was only 2 years. 2 years tak if you found it, then that is a tree. But what after 2 years? What if it gets degraded, it gets lost, someone cuts it off, something happens to it? There was no verification regarding that. So only 2 years for it and only on the number of trees. So you grow 1100 trees, you get a green carbon credit. This was a big problem now because now anyone can perform, just cheap afforestation of saplings anywhere. And after 2 years, it gets degraded. There is no real gain out of this. And what happens is the market gets flooded with now cheap carbon credits. Now everyone has a carbon credit. So what will happen if everyone has carbon credits? What will happen if everyone has? मेरे पास भी है, you also have. What will? This is for voluntary sector, not for industries. तो अब क्या होगा? मेरे पास भी, आपके पास भी, anything whose supply becomes more, what happens? Value will decrease. So the actual value of a carbon credit will ultimately decrease. And anyone can buy a carbon credit. Anyone in the name of, becoming green, which is called greenwashing. You must have read in ethics, greenwashing. You must have read about carbon colonialism. Carbon colonialism concept you are aware of, that the developed countries, they will actually, utilize the services of the developing countries, but then again, they will not stop their own activities. They will continue emitting the, suppose the emissions of greenhouse gases. They will say that we are carrying out afforestation in Ghana or whatever, or in Democratic Republic of Congo. But what will happen is effectively they are destabilizing people of indigenous tribal communities from there. And again, a sort of colonial exploitation of their resources is being carried out. So now this was leading to some cheapness of carbon credits and not good quality carbon credits, green credits that were coming into the market. So there were certain changes made. We have to focus on that. Now one green credit equals one new tree over 5 years old. So now we have said that 5 years a tree has to be old, as a green credit. And now we are focusing not on the number of trees, we are focusing on the canopy density. The target is to get 40% canopy density as a healthy forest ecosystem should have. So we have become more scientific in that, rather than just focusing on basic numbers. Fine. Apart from that, there should be continuous restoration on the degraded forest land. It should be continuous activity for 5 years. Now, the biggest change is that they have been made non-tradable. Otherwise, what was happening was I did some afforestation of not good quality, got the credit, sold it to you. You sold it to someone else. Now people are selling and buying these carbon credits. The land itself, the quality of forest that was grown, that was useless. Or whatever water restoration work was done was totally a hogwash. So what was happening effectively, that no real work was being done and money was being circulated in the name of carbon credit. So now only one time it can be traded. So it has become non-tradable, and there are some sort of exceptions for compensatory afforestation, and there are designated independent agencies that will verify that whatever the afforestation or restoration work in the ecosystem has been done or not. So now these have become non-tradable and non-transferable except between a company and its own subsidiary. Why? Just for ease of doing business. So that if suppose Adani Power and Adani Green Energy, they have to, or any such company, they have to ensure that they're meeting the carbon credits, then the subsidiary is being treated as the same company and they can interchange the credits there. So that compliance burden is reduced. However, the quality is now supposed to be mandatory. 40% canopy density, 5-year age of the trees. So this was the whole thing about the green credit program. You need to know the difference between the two, carbon credit and green credit program. Now there are other things like land-based carbon removal. They are in news. Basically, again, you have to decarbonize, and for that you have to grow trees on degraded land. And simple concepts like these will be useful in your mains answers. So any way forward, you can talk about land-based carbon removal. So use forests, soils, wetlands to ensure more carbon is taken up by them. For that, what you can do? Biocompost can be added to the soil. That increases the quality of the soil organic carbon, and it helps capture more carbon dioxide through photosynthesis from the plants that are growing there. So ultimately, you have to ensure more carbon sink is added, and for that, land-based carbon removal is a system. Carbon border adjustment mechanism was in news. Anything related to carbon, you need to know. So this was an initiative. This is actually an initiative by the European Union. What they want is what they are saying from their point of view is they want everyone to be treated the same. So they say that if an industry in my country or in my territory that is being treated as a carbon intensive industry, and if someone from outside with the same intensity of carbon emission is exporting a product to me, then I will impose a tax on them to equalize everyone and in the same way. But it affects the developing countries more. Why? Because they do not have access to the green technologies. And as they do not have access to green technologies, their products are unfairly taxed. So in the name of equal treatment, they are actually carrying out some sort of inequitable treatment. It is equal, but it is not equitable. Simple. So what they're saying, carbon tax on imports of certain products from countries which have less stringent policies. So if you make your steel sector, that is why we're talking about getting the steel, iron and steel sector under the carbon credit scheme. Why? Because the steel sector of India is getting impacted at a great way because of this European Union initiative. So 0.05% of India's GDP is getting burdened because of this tax. So this tax is being imposed on Indian products. Why? Because our production technologies are not as green, or they are quite high in emission intensity. So this is the basic funda behind it. You just have to follow this, and how India adapts to it, you need to know the story. Then certain changes regarding the Montreal Protocol and the Kigali Amendment, not really changes but implementations. But before that, let's just revise what it is all about. There is a convention called the Vienna Convention. What is it about? Ozone depleting substances. So Vienna Convention, fine, on ozone depleting substances. Under this is a protocol called the Montreal Protocol. This talks about what are those ozone depleting substances. Why do we want to ban these ozone depleting substances? So what does that lead to? Global warming से इसका नहीं लेना है. Ozone depleting. Basically, no. See, ozone, what does it block? Does it block the infrared radiation? UV radiation. It blocks the UV radiation. What does UV radiation do? Does it create heat? Heat to infrared radiation से it happens ना, because the earth absorbs the short wave radiation and it emits the long wave radiation. That gets trapped by the atmosphere. This is the basic global warming or the warming mechanism. But the ozone depleting substances, they deplete the ozone layer. Ozone anyway doesn't stop the infrared radiation. So heating, do not correlate heating with ozone depletion. Ozone depletion is more linked with the UV rays that are coming in. UV rays have such wavelength that they can disturb your DNA and even the cells of the plants. So they can cause cellular changes or micro level changes in the plants as well as the living organisms. That is the basic scare here. So it can cause skin cancer, blindness, radiation exposure, whatever. So to plants and any living organism. That is the funda, not global warming. Ozone depleting substances were notified under the Montreal Protocol. There were certain substances, especially the chlorofluorocarbons. Apart from that, halons and all, initially that were under this. Once these were banned, what did the productions and the product producers and manufacturers do? They shifted to something called the hydrofluorocarbons. Now these again were ozone depleting in nature, indirectly though, but these were not banned. So in 1996, there was an amendment here called the Copenhagen Amendment. These were banned. Then what did the producers and those people do who were using these ODS? They shifted to something called hydrofluorocarbons, HFCs. HFCs are not ozone depleting substances, but they are greenhouse gases. So the problem of ozone depletion now got shifted into greenhouse gas emission. This was banned by the Kigali Amendment. This was in 2012. This is the basic story behind ozone depleting substances. It should be clear that this is not, initially it was not linked to global warming. Only when HFCs came into picture, then it got linked to the global warming problem. Fine. What India is now doing and what is the current status you need to be aware of, that the Union Ministry directed all state and central authorities to stop granting environmental clearances to new HFC production units. So HFC is still being produced in India, and the target is India will phase down HFC in 4 steps: 10% reduction by 2032, 20% by 2037, 30% by 2042, and 85% by 2047. So our target is to, again, we are a developing country, common but differentiated responsibility according to respective capability. Example, this. HFC से अब switch कर रहे हैं to something called HFOs, hydrofluoroolefins. But इसमें भी problem है. इसमें क्या problem है? This gets converted into something called trifluoroacetic acid, and this hurts the environment. So again, something will follow. Next time, the next 10-20 years later or whatever, there will be something on HFOs. Ki now shift to something else. We'll shift to something else. Life goes on. Okay. So this was the whole story. Just need to remember India's track record. What is the status that can be asked? Fine. Challenges again, carbon colonialism. We talked about this. Lack of clear monitoring, reporting and verification systems. Greenwashing. We remember what greenwashing is: a company claiming to be very green, but actually causing great environmental harm. And something called oversaturation. That is again cheap carbon credits flooding the system. That now the totally poor quality carbon credits are flooding the system. And again, there are certain common concerns that the quality is not being followed and the quantity was being measured in terms of carbon credits and green credits. Way forward again, good verification, independent verification authorities, blockchain leveraging it for tracking the carbon credits. For example, the trees and all those whatever afforestation or suppose regenerative activities are being done, they can be tracked in a very independent way using blockchain technology. Try to put that. Then establish green credit as a regulated commodity. Now, right now it is not regulated as such. So we need to make it regulated derivative equivalent to 1 ton of CO2, right? The carbon credit. Green credit does not have a defined such quantity according to CO2. And then India's domestic market should be fully aligned with the Article 6. So these are common way forwards for any of these answers on the regarding carbon markets. Basically, carbon anywhere that you see in the paper or anywhere, you have to just follow it. Fine. Here in this part regarding the news on water bankruptcy. So this term can be asked. Common issues regarding water, you should be common data, you should be clear about. What is India's per capita water availability? This should be like on your tips. 1486 meter cube per person. What is the World Bank level or the what are the general level of water stress that we talk about is 1700 meter cube per person per year. So if less than that, there is per capita availability of water, we are in a water stress condition. So on an average, we as a country are under water stress. Apart from this, one more fact that you can quote repeatedly is that we have 4% of surface area or 4% of the total waters and 18% of population is dependent on it. The world population ratio we have is 18%, but the total fresh water proportion we have is only 4%. So 4% water, 18% people. Clear supply-demand mismatch. Any answer, anything regarding water will be dealt with in a simple framework of supply and demand. Supply side issues are linked to mostly climate change. Demand side issues are linked to behavior and overexploitation. Every answer, everything in UPSC will be dealing with the balance between the two. And what our philosophy would be, will be looking at changing the demand or the supply. Can we actually change water supply? Can we change the hydrological cycle as such? So what we'll do, we'll change our demand. And how can we change our demand? Behavioral change, something using technology, something using indigenous knowledge, all those things. Within this framework comes the topic of water. अब इसी में क्या होगा? There will be more and more new terms, fancy terms that will be added and that will be asked in your exam. What is water bankruptcy? Nothing special about water bankruptcy. There is something called water stress. Fine, where there is a greater demand than supply. So that is water stress. Water bankruptcy is when the demand is so much more than the supply that it causes irreversible degradation in the underground water system or any water system. So the surface water or the groundwater will get irreversibly damaged because of greater demand. For example, in Delhi, suppose we are drawing a lot of water. More population, right now the population of Delhi is suppose 3 crores. For example, 1 crore people arrive tomorrow or over the next 5 days. And then the groundwater withdrawal will change accordingly. What will happen? The underground aquifers will first get depleted. So, and you will link this with what happened a couple of days earlier as well and is constantly happening. There is an underground layer. This is called the aquifer. It has water inside it. There is a pressure being exerted by the water on the surface body or on the walls of this aquifer. There is certain discharge that is being done, not sewage, but discharge is being done through bore wells or those, whatever boring is being done in the houses, directly drawing from the aquifer. We're draining the water from here. Now the water gets over. What will happen here? Vacuum se matlab nahi hai. The pressure that the water was exerting on the walls of this aquifer, that will go away. This will, in a way, collapse. Simple words, I'm like not going into the science of it, but just the basics of it. Upar kya hoga? Subsidence of land. So land subsidence, which is in news constantly, it is also linked to depletion of groundwater. In coastal areas, what will happen? This empty space will be taken up by underground movement of saline water into this aquifer. So there is a vacuum here, or not exactly a vacuum, but there is a pressure gap here. This will be filled up by water coming from the sea. And your groundwater will turn saline. This is called salt water intrusion. This was asked last year. So these themes you need to keep on, dealing with. The whole year, anything regarding water, any theme you have to understand. Basics about water, you should know the legal aspects of water. It's a state subject. Interstate water is a union subject, and Article 262 allows Parliament to adjudicate these disputes. And the interstate water disputes, again, a federal political structure, but geography is not really bound by these federal units. Rivers work in basins, but the states are, dividing this basin into many parts. This causes disputes. Why? For example, Ganga basin, Jharkhand is a part of Ganga basin, but the Ganga does not flow through Jharkhand. But on the basis of the basin or the integrated water management principle, Jharkhand should have a share of Ganga's water. This will cause a dispute that if the river is not flowing through a territory, the water is not yours. But the basin is still part of the state of Jharkhand. We are supplying water through our feeder rivers to the Ganga river. So we need to also get something out of it as well. This is basically any water dispute. An upstream state will create a dam, Indus Water Treaty, the downstream state will protest. The Great Bend Dam on Brahmaputra will be made by China, India will protest it and say that it will affect our downstream interests. What we will do, we will create more dams to basically sponge the effect of that dam. So again, the whole basin is integrated, but it is fragmented due to political administrations, political considerations. So that is why interstate water dispute is again a topic which you will constantly deal with in polity classes as well. Fine. So water bankruptcy, we saw what it is. Water stress is reversible, basically higher demand related to supply, and water crisis is something which is short term. There is a water crisis in Bangalore, suppose, but it will get solved in a few days once the, suppose, water supply comes back. But water stress is more long term, still reversible. Water bankruptcy is irreversible. That is it. Fine. Apart from that, there is data regarding groundwater extraction that will always be relevant for any of your answers. Again, challenges framework, demand supply, both you will have to tackle. Demand side challenges and supply side challenges. Way forward also mostly will be demand side. Supply side, there are only few things that you can modify. You can only manage it a little bit, you can't really modify it. Fine. Let's move on to the next topic. In terms of water, anything regarding water, if ever there is a way forward that is asked, you have to talk about the Mihir-Shah committee recommendations. One water approach, that is groundwater and surface water has to be managed together and a whole basin has to be managed together. Same thing is applicable in any of the water answers. So try to inculcate and talk about a new national water policy or talk about a wastewater reuse policy. So we basically have to manage our demand. We cannot really manage the supply. Fine. Let's move on. This was just a small part. Certain changes now in the environmental waste management rules, especially in two of the rules, that is the solid waste management rules and the plastic waste management rules. See, solid waste management rules, there is a basic difference now from 2016. 10 years, so it's an anniversary year. So this year, main students, you have to make sure you know this. Next year could also be a potential question. 2016 solid waste management rules had certain categories of solid waste. So there were basically three categories: dry, wet, and certain other categories, which had the rest of them. What we are doing now, we're based on the behavioral, tendencies of humans and whatever the waste is being generated from households and the basic solid waste producers. We have divided now it into four categories. So that is dry, wet, sanitary, and special care. So there is a recategorization of waste categories. Sanitary waste has all those things that are used for feminine hygiene, other things like diapers, anything which is related to the sanitation aspect of things. Special care waste refers to other categories of waste that are now left over. For example, what is written in your material regarding special care waste? इसमें दिया नहीं है. See, anything regarding LED lights or semiconductors, any apart from this, whatever requires some special care will come under this, which requires medical waste, all these things, e-waste, all these things will come under special category of the fourth category of this new rules. Apart from that, there are certain changes. There is something called extended producer responsibility in waste generation. Okay, that was asked a few years ago in your prelims as well. Extended producer responsibility refers to a producer who's producing, suppose, plastic bottles. And you will see written on that plastic bottle, if you buy the raw juice and all, उस पे लिखा होगा कि the recycling, the price of it, if you sell it back to us, will be 20 rupees per kg. If you sell 1 kg of these bottles to us, we will give you 20 rupees. So that is extended producer responsibility. Apple being responsible for disposal of old iPhones. That if your phone is defunct, it has gone bad, give it to us, we'll incentivize you, give you some discount coupon or something, and we will process the waste of it. So if I'm producing it, it is my responsibility to collect the waste and dispose it off. Yes?
It was extended producer responsibility was introduced by plastic waste?
No. Now I'm talking about what is happening in the solid waste management rules. Here, we cannot give an extended producer responsibility because most of the solid waste is generated by households. So we cannot be now, apart from whatever we are dealing with, we cannot go around now managing our waste as well. कि मैंने अगर कूड़ा फेंका so give it back to me. I can't do that. Households should not be placed with that burden. So now the thing is on bulk waste generator responsibility. So in solid waste, if someone is producing solid waste in a bulk manner, then they only will have the responsibility. But there will be responsibility on some people. Earlier, there was no such concept like that. So there is a basic change here now. There is a centralized portal now to track all the stages of solid waste management. You see all these cars that they go around those garbage collection vehicles. They are now monitored by a central, sort of a control room. So for that now there will be a centralized online portal to track all these stages. That where is the waste going exactly. And the basic problem that we are going to tackle here is the problem of landfills. The Ghazipur landfill, every city has a landfill, Azadpur landfill. And the problem is ultimately to tackle that problem because again it is a big political problem as well. So these rules are basically meant to tackle that problem. The ultimate thing is now that there will be mandatory on annual audits of the landfills. Fine. From the landfills, there will be now provisions for mining of waste. That is biomining. That you can take up some waste, process it using algae or bacteria, and such bacteria which will dissolve everything else except precious metals. So biomining and things like that will be done. Refuse derived fuel by the cement plants, that has now been mandated, that cement plants will have to take up certain fuel from the waste material of these landfills. So now a circular economy component is being introduced into solid waste management as well. So basically we are looking to eliminate landfills and we are looking to reuse this into various purposes wherever it can be used, wherever the solid waste can be used. And there will be compensation under the polluter pays principle. Polluter pays was a principle established by Supreme Court in the MC Mehta and the Bhopal gas tragedy case. So basically whoever pollutes will pay for that and they will be paid to the person who are affected by that pollution. So again, some of the changes were as like this. Regarding plastic waste management, recycling has now been more and more focused upon. The recycling, the scale of this will increase from 30% to 60% in terms of a producer. So anyone who's producing plastic, for example, they will have to produce or they will have to recycle 60% of whatever you are producing. Right now, the legal objective is to get only 30% in packaging. Apart from that, there are various definitions of end-of-life disposal, reusing plastic waste processors. Recycled packaging also must meet the official legal standard established by Bureau of Indian Standards. So this rating they must have so that the quality of the recycled plastic is also good. Fine. Apart from that, there are more provisions regarding the penalties. So the penalties can now be enforced by the municipal bodies as well. Earlier, there was no such exact penal provisions. Fine. Now some data regarding the plastic problem and all, you can see some trends that what is the status of solid waste management in India. 55 to 60% is biodegradable. 60% is from urban areas, and waste sector contributes to 2.5% of total emissions of the country. Now, one thing that I want you to focus on is the dump site remediation accelerator program. Fine. This is in news and this can be used in your answers for your mains, or it can be asked in your prelims as well. Basically, we are trying to eliminate many of the legacy old landfills. 240 landfills have been identified that they will be eliminated in a few years. So basically, we will try to remediate and eliminate big landfills like these landfills around Delhi and all across the country. So regarding that, there is something called Lakshya, zero dump sites, by processing old accumulated legacy waste under this Swachh Bharat Mission Urban 2.0. For that, we can convert it into refuse-derived fuel. Inert materials and construction debris will be reused for road buildings. The ultimate objective is that landfills, and the law that now mandates that landfills can only be used for dumping that waste which is inert, which is non-recyclable and non-reusable. So now every Tom, Dick and Harry kind of waste will not be dumped into landfills. Only waste like construction waste. For example, a building is demolished and the construction waste will go to the landfill now. But not every waste, not every plastic bottle, everything. The target is to not dump all of that into the landfills and rather go into circular economy, that is reusing whatever we have produced. Fine. So target overall from the whole document, you have to just get the crux of it. We are focusing on circular economy, we are focusing on extended producer responsibility, and we are focusing on eliminating many of these landfills. These are the new developments in these rules. Fine. Let's move on. Regarding EIA, environmental impact assessment, you have to understand that there are few new developments. The basic development is that there was a Supreme Court judgment last year. It was called the Van Shakti judgment. What they said was that retrospective environmental clearances cannot be granted. Simple. The latest development is that. The basic process of environmental impact assessment, I am sure you are aware of. There are 6 steps: screening, scoping, then making the report, then public consultation, and then finally monitoring and verification of those, whatever action was done. So these are 6 steps of assessing the impact of any project on the environment. The new development is retrospectively these clearances cannot be given. They were actually in a previous judgment allowed, and through various new guidelines by the Ministry of Environment, they were allowed that okay, you can give retrospective clearance even after the project has started. The clearance can be granted later. But now that has been not allowed by the Supreme Court. But in November 2025, there is an update and they have actually, stayed that. And they are again reviewing the same judgment. So there was a certain change here that for strategic, atomic, critical and strategic mineral mining projects, public consultations have been exempted from. So public consultation can be exempted if the project is about mining of strategic or economically important minerals. That is the new development here. So you need to follow this, make sure that whatever happens ultimately regarding the retrospective clearance as well as this issue, you do follow. Apart from that, the Great Nicobar project, you have to follow that, and the Aravali issue. These 2 issues in terms of case studies can be used, or they might be directly or indirectly asked in the exams. So there has to be a basic understanding of the geography of this area, of the Great Nicobar, the last island, the southernmost island of the Andaman and Nicobar archipelago, and what is the basic relevance, why this project is being greenlit. Isme, the latest development is that the National Green Tribunal has allowed it to go ahead. Why? The logic behind that is that it is a strategically important project and the environmental safeguards have been taken according to them while planning of this project. So they are okay with it. However, the local bodies, the local tribes, they are all protesting against this, and there are certain allegations that some of the critically endangered species will be hurt because of this, and also it is on an active mega thrust fault line. So all of these are vulnerabilities for this project, but because of strategic reasons, this has been granted approval by NGT. Regarding the Aravali case, the latest status is that Supreme Court has stayed that old definition. I hope you all are aware. The basic problem is this, that the definition, you know what the definition was? That 100 meter, anything above that will be a Aravali hill. Fine. But what we see here is 500 meters elevation covers more than 70% of Aravalis. Fine. And 100 meters is here. So most of that area is now exempted, and this area only will be the Aravalis. Anything above the 100 meter range is now Aravalis, and apart from that will be exempted. So that leaves most of this area vulnerable to mining and exploitation. But again, this definition was a little unscientific. What we need to understand is Forest Survey of India gave a sort of guideline regarding this, that anything where the slope is more than 3 degrees, that should be counted as Aravalis. So basically, if you are asked to give a way forward here, you should say that we have to scientifically follow Forest Survey of India's guidelines, that anything above 3 degrees rather than about the elevation above sea level should be used. Why? Because again, the basin problem will be there. This is a whole single basin, for example, or the hydrology is connected. The aquifer of Aravali will be connected till Delhi. So if you are mining somewhere here, you are probably affecting the aquifer here. So we have to look at Aravali in a more geohydrological way. This is given in your notes. A geohydrological approach is needed, as well as the Forest Survey of India's recommendations of 3 degree slope to be taken as the definition. Apart from that, the biological characteristics, the wildlife corridors, the common ecology, that should be taken while defining the Aravalis. So it's not just that a hill is Aravali. Even if the ecosystem, if the landscape is like that, that is also Aravali. If the similar plants are found, even if they are not on a hill, then that is Aravali. So a more scientific definition is needed. And again, for any such issue regarding environment versus development, a simple answer that you can give is a cooperative model. Okay? Any mining that has to be done in Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh, karni hai, no other option, create a cooperative model. Give them local ownership of that. Give them employment and give them local ownership, give them royalty. Simple. Aravali mein you have to do something. Firstly, do it in a scientific way. Do it in a way wherein again these carbon credits and things like green credit program are utilized. You do not undertake developmental activities without any guardrail. And if you have to do it, then you involve the local people. Then the funds should be diverted to their upliftment and for establishment of, suppose, compensatory afforestation. So this will be your basic framework for answering these questions. Again, fine, try to inculcate the local community's interest wherever such a question is asked. Again, this is the whole status. You can see the various way forwards. These are important for your future questions. Fine. There is a delay in EIA. All these issues, legacy issues in EIA are the same over the years. And way forwards again, there has to be a single overarching law on EIA. There is no law on EIA. It is under the Environmental Protection Act, but there has to be a specific law. That has to be a certain case here. Fine. Let's go on quickly. Renewable energy, we've covered a lot of those things. There are certain new developments. The new bioenergy program is there, as well as the geothermal policy has been updated. So ethanol blending, bioenergy and geothermal policy. These 3 changes you need to cover from these notes. The infographics are given, and I'm sure you must have gone through them many times when you go through current affairs. So this I've highlighted regarding geothermal provinces. If there is ever a question, please make this map. It is very important. This will differentiate your answer. There are 10 geothermal provinces in India. Again, it is all linked to the geology of the area. Basically, geothermal energy comes when under the earth the temperatures rise. And as the temperatures rise, there is potential for some underground water to get heated up and come out through various cracks or fissures in simple language. And when it comes out with certain energy, some steam, and that can be harnessed to produce electricity. And that is a self-sustaining source of electricity. It is also continuous. Unlike solar and wind energy, it is not intermittent. So it can be harnessed, and there are certain pilot projects that are being undertaken in Karnataka that might increase as you go on over the next year. So again, any policy will have these things, not just the geothermal energy policy, every policy has these things. Like FDI, the FDI should be, if not 100%, it has to be improved for more investment. Then fiscal incentives, giving tax holidays, import duty exceptions, etc. to those who are investing in geothermal power plants. Then providing up to 30 years of support to the projects in terms of finances, creating avenues for joint ventures from international entities as well as the government entities, and promoting the technologies through various measures. So basically, the policy has to be followed over the next year because it can be asked. Otherwise, you can use it in your answers for a way forward or as a good initiative. We'll move on quickly. We have to cover disaster management. One more thing, the High Seas Treaty. This came into force, it was adopted, it was ratified by more than 60 countries, and after a certain period of time, it has now come into force. So, till now, there was a treaty on the oceans called the UN Convention on Laws of Seas, UN clause, that governed the areas up to 200 nautical miles. That is called the exclusive economic zones. Beyond that, there was no clear treaty. So, those areas were called high seas. As you can see in this diagram, these high seas, they were ungoverned by any treaty. But these were large areas of the planet which were also critical to the biodiversity as well as the climate. So, the High Seas Treaty was basically made to conserve these areas. The basic target is to convert 30% of the total of these high seas into marine protected areas where no exploitation of the marine animals can be undertaken. So, basically, we are now protecting the earth. This is part of the larger target under something called the Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. The target is 30 by 30 to conserve 30% of the Earth's area by 2030.
Earth's area or high seas?
That is for High Seas Treaty. Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework talks about 30% conservation by 2030. So, following that comes the High Seas Treaty to conserve 30% of those areas as marine protected areas. So, there is a clear difference in that. Both of these, they come under the Convention on Biological Diversity. Before this, we were treating with UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. This is now the other UN Convention on Biodiversity. Iske andar, we have certain biodiversity targets that we have to meet, and we have to just track them. Some of them have been given. If any of those biodiversity targets are used, please follow them so that you have a status ki how much the Indian government or India is doing to conserve and to meet these targets under this treaty. Fine. This treaty has been ratified by the Biological Diversity Act of 2002. The High Seas Treaty has not been ratified by India. Okay? It might be ratified in a few months maybe, so you have to look at that once it gets ratified. Now let's come to disaster management. Regarding disaster management, there are two major developments over the past 1 year. One was there was an amendment in the Disaster Management Act. Fine. So disaster management, I am sure you all are aware, it operates in a cycle starting from disaster, then response and recovery, then basically some reconstruction, and then some preparation, and then again the disaster strikes. So this is the disaster management cycle. Earlier, India and the world was operating on a reactive approach. There was a disaster and we used to react. Bhoj earthquake, and then we reacted. Now we are going on a more proactive approach, that we are developing capacities. We are making sure that there is enough infrastructural adaptation. We are making sure that there is enough research and development. We are making sure there is enough awareness and training of the local people regarding any disaster. So this is the basic disaster management framework and the current status. For that, there was an act called the Disaster Management Act of 2005. This got updated in 2025. Here, some of the new categories of disasters firstly were introduced. So there were new disasters, some. Apart from that, there was an Urban Disaster Management Authority that was given a legal mandate. Apart from that, the State Disaster Response Force that was given a legal status. So, disaster management in terms of its organizational hierarchy operates at a national level under NDMA, which is combined with the National Disaster Response Force, which is the force which you see which rescues people. While at the state level, it is operated by SDMA, supported by the SDRF, which did not have a statutory recognition till now, but now it has, apart from the Urban Disaster Management Authority. So these are the new changes in the Disaster Management Act. Fine, this is from last year. This year, what has been in news is this. Financing of firstly the disaster risk reduction. This has been under news because of various funds and India being proactive in that. We have the largest rule-based DRR financing system and we showcased it at the global platform of DRR. Okay, just understand how disaster financing is done. If you know that, then you will be able to tackle your questions and your answers, whatever is asked. Disaster risk reduction or disaster financing in India is basically done by the center to the states because center is mostly in charge of most of the revenue. Fine. These funds are, as we talked about, they are divided into 80% for adaptation, 80% for mitigation and response and 20% for adaptation and the rest. Now, what happens is that the funding operates at two levels from the center to the states. How that fund is to be distributed has changed. This was given by the 15th Finance Commission, that how disaster financing will be done. So what they gave was an additive model. They talked about hazard prone areas and they said that whatever the intensity of hazard is, we will add it up in the area and we will distribute funds according to that. Nothing else apart from that. The 16th Finance Commission, which came into force from this year 2026, they have proposed now a change in this fund allocation formula. The change now is that we are focusing on a multiplicative formula, wherein the risk index on the basis of which funding will be given will be hazard into exposure into vulnerability. What is hazard? Hazard is basically any of the natural hazards that, suppose Delhi is prone to. Delhi is prone to flooding, urban flooding. So it's an hazard. It's earthquake prone zone, earthquake. So suppose Delhi scores 2 marks here. UP doesn't score on suppose so many parameters. So UP gets less marks here. Then comes exposure. Exposure is basically linked to what is the surface area to which the whole unit is prone to disasters. And the surface area is nothing but the population. So the total population is basically the exposure. If there are 200 people in this room and the roof collapses, then the exposure is more. But if there is no one in this room and the roof collapses, the exposure is less. Third comes the vulnerability, that is how much is it susceptible. Are the people uneducated? Are there good infrastructure and roads in the area? So now there is a multiplicative model to calculate something called the disaster risk index. So that out of the total funding, earlier 20% funds were given on the basis of the risk index of a state and 80% were given on the basis of the earlier spending records. That how much have you spent earlier? If you spent more earlier, for example, Odisha had spent more earlier on the disaster risk reduction, it will get more funds. Now that allocation has also changed. The formula for disaster risk index has changed and its weightage for funding has also changed. So now 30% weightage will be given to the disaster risk index and 70% to the historical expenditure of the state. This is the total quantum of money that every state will get. Apart from that, 10% of funds they can utilize for any local disaster. For example, if there is a unique disaster to any place which is not notified under the Disaster Management Act, then that 10% of the total funds they can be allocated to that unique disaster. So this is the overall financing framework. Fine. Apart from that, see this total disaster response and mitigation funds. Now, on the basis of this formula, they are divided into the various states, and within that, every state has to keep 20% for the mitigation, 80% for the response. Fine. Currently, there are 10 nationally notified disasters. Earlier, there were 4 notified disasters. So, these are the basic changes in the disaster financing framework and the disaster management framework. Fine. These are the changes, and now issues and way forward regarding that will again remain the same. Funding has to be done in a more transparent way, in a trackable way, and in an equitable way. What happens here? There is some issue regarding this also. Now, if you take a multiplicative model and a state has, suppose, greater population, but its hazard proneness is less. Whereas there is a state, for example, a tribal state like Odisha, where the population is not as much, but its hazard proneness is more. So the funds will now not be distributed in an equitable manner. Just because the population of Andaman and Nicobar is less, you will give them lesser funds. So there are issues here as well. Fine. So anything that happens, there will always be issues. These are the exact parameters. Vulnerability is calculated by inverse of net state domestic product. Population is the exposure component, and hazard is the how many notified disasters are you vulnerable to. This is the basic disaster funding framework. First is the National Disaster Risk Management Fund or the State Disaster Risk Management Fund, from which 80% are allocated to the National Disaster Response Fund or the State Disaster Response Fund, and 20% to the National Disaster Management Fund or Mitigation Fund or the State Disaster Mitigation Fund. This is wrong, it's mitigation. And within that, from the NDRF or the SDRF, 40% is for response and relief, 30% is for recovery and instruction, and 10% is for preparedness and capacity building. If you make this diagram, you're getting good marks. That means you have a clear, in-depth understanding of the topic. Fine. And this is the new disaster risk index. Something related to localization of disaster risk index or disaster risk reduction is also being done. Basically, every area has unique disasters and in unique seasons. So this will always be news, and Sendai framework also talks about this thing that you have to localize your disaster risk reduction policies. That is why 10% of the funds are given for that. Crowd disaster management can be asked for this year, at least for this mains, because the Kumbh stampede as well as the Delhi railway station, many of the stampedes have occurred regarding the last year's IPL celebration stampedes. So anything regarding that you have to follow, and you have to ensure that you follow the National Disaster Management Plan guidelines that are given. So every disaster comes from this 6-part framework which is given in the National Disaster Management Plan. Every answer will be from that. Okay, so if you find any question on disaster management, just follow the National Disaster Management Plan guidelines, which starts from understanding what the disaster risk is, then carrying out some structural measures, for example, retrofitting of buildings, then non-structural measures, for example, creating some education or awareness in the people, then capacity building, that is training volunteers. In that, there is a new initiative called Aapda Mits, Aapda Sakhis. So that comes under the capacity building. Fine. And then there is something called climate change adaptation. So in disaster management, you have to club it with climate change while formulating your policies. So again, fire safety. These are the 2 themes that can be asked this year. Fire safety as well as stampedes. There are many such tragedies that are occurring, especially in the summers, so they can be asked. Again, the way forwards and the issues regarding funding and financing will have a certain common structure that you can see. Next, regarding internal security, what was asked last year was Naxalism. So for 2026 at least, Naxalism should not be asked. It's less likely. What can be asked more is something regarding Northeast and something regarding AFSPA. These are repeated themes. So the latest development is that the Home Minister has announced that AFSPA will be removed from Northeast within the next few years. Next year entirely it will be removed barring 1 or 2 states. So you firstly have to know the current status of AFSPA. For this map has been given. it shows that Jammu and Kashmir and Ladakh, they are under AFSPA. Regarding Assam, only few districts. Arunachal, few districts. Nagaland, it's largely active, and in Manipur, the Imphal Valley is exempted. Apart from that, rest of the areas are under AFSPA. So basically, what does AFSPA do? You can, central government or the state, they can declare any area to be disturbed area under this act. And then the armed forces will get powers to interrogate, powers to basically arrest, and without any warrant to carry out some operations regarding the disturbances that are in the areas. Now again, the issues will remain the same. There is no clear definition of what is disturbed. There is sometimes little review to it. Local people are not very well consulted. There are human rights violations, allegations of them, and there are also issues from neighboring countries and regarding something regarding to freedom of speech and expression that are hindered because of this. So the current status again will change. For this year means this will remain probably the same, but you need to keep this on your radar. So there are certain positives as well. You have to look at the positives and the negatives of such a law. Wherever there is something regarding security versus, suppose, in freedom. So you have to balance both. You cannot just go for freedom. You have to go for the security implications as well. So again, it gives operational flexibility. It has also led to various successes in reducing the number of disturbances or violence in these areas. And most of the Northeast has seen peace over the last few years. And this declaration itself by the Home Minister is an indication that we are very confident that there will be complete peace by next year in the Northeast. Like how we have declared India to be almost Naxal free now. Na? Only 2 districts, I think, remain as of current status. So, completely, that was the target. But abhi right now the status is that 2 districts, I think, are officially still there where there is some element of extremism. But largely it is eradicated. So whatever, one day, definitely over the next year, legal or at least officially it will be declared. But till now, we can say that that has been a success. And it has been a success again. Why? Because we have focused both on the security aspect as well as the development and the political freedom aspects of the areas. So again, a similar strategy will be there for AFSPA as well. Focus on development and focus on the people. Simple. So again, the challenges will remain the same as we talked about. Uneven situations, there are problems in center-state coordinations. Huh? बचा है ना वहाँ? Yes, वही तो 2 districts. Yes. ठीक है. Again, way forward will remain same. We'll talk about transparency, accountability, involving local people, and having certain review. So there are certain committees regarding the AFSPA. First, there was a Jeevan Reddy Committee, 2005. You can write about this, the Jeevan Reddy Committee, 2005. Okay, J. Reddy. It talked about repealing AFSPA. Second ARC, the Administrative Reforms Commission Report, 2007, agreed with this. And there was the latest committee was the Santosh Hegde Committee that talked about a 6-month periodic review. So basically a 6-month periodic review right now is the current way to go, that this committee recommendations should be followed. So AFSPA, these 3 committees are very, very important. Fine.
6-month review
of AFSPA. Like once you've declared it, review it after 6 months. What happened in Manipur? Manipur, basically, a lot of the thanas, AFSPA was removed from them just before the violence broke out. So from around 19 or 20 of those circles, AFSPA was removed. That coupled with the High Court's just comment that Métis should be given the scheduled tribe status. That also coupled with actions on the opium farming illegally that was being done in the state. These 3 things provided the spark to the overall conflict in Manipur. So again, just removing AFSPA or repealing it will not be a sustainable solution. You have to review it and then from time to time, in a phased way, just take it a notch down. Fine. So AFSPA and Northeast were important. Lastly, regarding the smart border management, this was in news recently. After the West Bengal elections, it was declared that the total West Bengal border will be fenced now. And smart fencing has been in operation in certain pockets in the India-Pakistan border as well as the India-Bangladesh border. It is very less, 72 kilometers I think in the India-Pakistan border and 10 to 15 kilometers in India-Myanmar and Bangladesh borders, out of a total of around 7 to 8,000 kilometers of these two borders. So the status is very, very low. It's not even 1%. But now this program is being scaled up. Recently, in May 2026, the Home Minister announced that we are developing a fully smart border model with advanced surveillance infrastructure, which will be deployed especially along the Pakistan and the Bangladesh border. Again, smart border management system will be about integrating technology with the physical infrastructure. So basically, a smart border will have a physical fencing that will be coupled with sensors, that will be coupled with drones, that will be coupled with various technologies to monitor that, so that there is, lesser loss of life in terms of any border conflict or infiltration. Fine. So basically, overall framework of border management is under Home Ministry. I'm sure all of you are aware. This border management system is also managed by the various paramilitary forces. One force, one border is the current principle. That every border, for example, the Indo-Nepal border will have Sashastra Seema Bal. The Indo-Pakistan border will have BSF. The Indo-Myanmar border will have... Indo-Myanmar में कौन है? Assam Rifles. ITBP is Indo-China. नहीं, Indo-Nepal is SSB. Sashastra Seema Bal is India-Nepal. And SSB is also India-Bhutan. So basically, every border should have one force so that there is, common operational measures and, whatever the administrative problems as well as the operational problems, they are dealt with in a sort of a more organized way. So that is the current status. You should have certain points regarding the comprehensive integrated border management system. Basically, if you can make a simple diagram, that will suffice and it will add value to your answer. Just make something, just make like a little fence. You can make a physical fence and deploy some sort of sensors here, satellite technologies, make something called like drones here, sensors here, just to add value to your answer. If there is ever a question on border management, just try to make a diagram. There is no diagram given on the internet. I tried to find it, there was nothing. So I figured it out that you have to draw it yourself. But if you draw it, get good marks. Fine. And recent developments, again, West Bengal is the latest development where more and more infiltrators are being sent back, as well as fencing is being done through land acquisition. So the basic problem here was land acquisition, as the state government was not able to or was not acquiring lands for carrying out the proper fencing along the borders. This problem is more pertinent in West Bengal but not in the Indo-China border. Why? Indo-China border has no problem of land acquisition, but Indo-Bangladesh border was just stalled because of the lack of land acquisition. Why? Terrain was the major reason. Indo-China border is the Himalayan border. It is on snow peaks. It is a watershed border. Whereas the Indo-Bangladesh border is a porous border. It is a border in the basically fertile alluvial plains. So there is no clear geographical boundary. That is the simple reason why there were no issues while demarcating that border. However, if a difference in the border is asked, then the Indo-China border is not a border, rather it is a frontier, because it is not clearly demarcated till now, and it is called line of actual control and not an international border, because high peaks cannot be fenced and they will never be fenced. They will always remain frontiers. Do you have an idea what is frontier and a border? What is a frontier? Naturally hota hai, and it is not distinctly marked. Border is man-made and it is marked on the map. It is a clear line. Frontier is a zone. So frontier cannot be really ever marked, but these borders will be marked, like the Indo-Bangladesh border can be easily marked in the future. Usi pe the next question will be on in 2026. if there is a question, it will be around measures for specific measures on Indo-Bangladesh border. GS paper 3 is going to ask you specific questions, so you cannot write generic anything in that. So please ensure that you have certain data or facts about all of these issues regarding every other border. So these were your topics, and the last one, let us also do this. See, there were few post-Operation Sindoor, there were a few doctrines that were declassified. Basically, these are our strategies that we had not really declared, but they were always there. For example, there is a quote by the National Security Advisor that India does not have a declared national security doctrine, but it does not mean that it does not have one. So we have a security doctrine, we have various doctrines, but we have not declared them. However, post-Operation Sindoor, we have decided to declassify them and declare them overtly, so that everyone knows what is our strategy and what is our plan in a way. Now, what is in news is something called multi-domain operations and the doctrines regarding multi-domain operations. Multi-domain operations, if you have to understand in a simple way, is just this. Any armed conflict or any conflict, for example, the Operation Sindoor, which was held last year, it got conflicts on many different levels. In the space domain, cyberspace domain, air domain, land domain, and the maritime domain. So this is basically multi-domain operations or multi-domain warfare. Now, internal security questions are always like that. They will ask you a specific term. What are lone wolf attacks? What is surgical strike? What is grey zone warfare? So they can ask you what is multi-domain warfare. So multi-domain warfare is the modern era of war, where war is not just being undertaken on land or air or sea, but all across. Whatever we can see, Operation Sindoor, 15% of all the attacks were cyber attacks. So based on that information, we have decided to now overtly declare our cyber defense doctrine as well as the joint multi-domain operation doctrines. So that was in news, and these doctrines, they have to be understood that what are the key elements of those. Again, we are trying to ensure that, for example, even fake news was part of the information warfare. So the war actually got into everyone's homes. We were seeing news channels which were transmitting fake news openly, and we were getting social media messages that were totally fake. So the war basically entered another domain, that is the cyber domain. And this question can be asked, especially this year, and it can be connected with the increasing incidents of breaches of cybersecurity. Or something on cybersecurity like digital arrest can be linked with the cross-border systems that are operating them. So basically, multi-domain doctrines are needed to tackle these threats. Basically, it was released in 2025 August and provides basically how the character of war is changing and how we will deal with all of these in a connected and a collaborative way. This needs to be seen in conjunction with the theaterization of the armed forces. Theaterization, everyone is aware of? Theaterization is basically that right now the Indian armed forces operate in a different way. We have an armed forces, army, which has certain commands and headquarters that were also asked this year. There is a navy which has certain commands, certain regions, and there is an air force which has certain commands. These are all separate. They are not in conjunction with each other. For example, the central command of the army is not equivalent to the central command of the air force. What we are trying to do is theaterize, basically have integrated commands where army, air force and navy, if there is a naval requirement there, they will be operated and stationed in a single place, and that will have a certain boundary. The old boundaries will go away regarding the military boundaries, the military commands or the armed command, air force commands, and there will be a single boundary called a theatre boundary. And within that theatre, the strategy as well as the operations will be conducted in a combined way. Because again, the warfare has become multi-domain and basically, so the multi-domain operations are reflected and they can be seen in conjunction with the theaterization of the armed forces and the commands. So basically, these two topics can be asked, especially this year mains. And again, as the theaterization has not been formally done, so if it is done over the next year, so we will have to follow the news of this topic, and it can be asked regarding the defense security strategy of the country. So again, all these doctrines, the basic features you have to understand, see which are the new doctrines, and certain critical analysis of Operation Sindoor that can be asked, especially this year, whoever are appearing, and maybe next year if not asked this year. What are the takeaways from that? What are the issues that we faced? Fine. So certain internal security, if you use some quotes, you will get great marks. If you use things like the 3 Ds that were given. So the 3 Ds of modern warfare were given by General Dwivedi: dispersion, democratization and diffusion. So basically no conflict is now concentrated at a single place. All across the border, into our homes, in the cyber infrastructure of the country, warfare was everywhere. Democratized because even non-state actors were carrying it out, not just army people, but non-state actors, hackers were trying to hack our data. And diffusion, basically, there is no single domain which will give a decisive outcome. It will not be that we will attack a port and we will capture the whole country. No. But we'll have to capture the hearts and minds of the people. That cannot be done without information warfare. So, for example, if there has to be any aggressive strategy, that has to inculcate information warfare and defense from the information warfare as well. So, basically, these are key terms, key catchy terms that you can use. And again, there is linkage with the theaterization. Issues again will be people issues like synchronization gaps. There will be issues regarding implementation of these doctrines. There will be issues regarding structure of the army, that there are rigid structures, and constantly changing the doctrines could be an issue in having a stable policy. And the way forward again will be institutionalizing these through information dissemination, joint exercises, all those things, and expanding there was something new that has been inculcated, that is the psychological defense division. So that was actually as a response to whatever the psychological warfare occurred during Operation Sindoor. We have now a psychological defense division now. So this is a new initiative and it has to be now integrated into the various communication channels and the internal security networks of the country, because that will defend the people from getting into fear mongering or hate mongering, and that creating internal instability. So basically the rollout has to be phased and it has to be done in a multi-stakeholder collaborative way, like everything, like EIA, same for internal security. The options, the steps, they do not change. Everything happens in a calibrated way, in a phased approach. Fine. So these were the issues. They were more relevant for 2026, but let's hope that you follow these, and if not asked in 2026, we can hope for these in 2027. Anything, any question, anything which you feel you could not capture? Which one? Amphibious operations again are the same. I think you must have seen there are certain visuals from Gulf of Kutch, that there are areas which require you to have vehicles and technologies that tackle both the marine and the land areas in terms of a threat. So amphibious operations are those, and there is now again a declared doctrine for that. So these operations, all these things were being done earlier as well, but now the doctrine has been given and you should be aware of it. It will never be asked in a detailed way. But amphibious operations, as the name suggests, both on the land as well as the sea. Anything else? Anything? Thoda sa we went quick, thoda tez gaye the, but we tried to cover it up, क्योंकि फिर topics बहुत ज़्यादा थे और time आपका limited है. But we had to cover 4 subjects, so it was important. Baki, you have your material and the story doesn't end at the material, but it gives you an indication. This is just your target. Apart from that, please continue doing your own analysis. PYQs ko rat lijiye. Once you remember the question regarding every topic, you will anyway not be confused by any material, any class. Nothing will disturb you. You will be on your own path, and just couple it up with the toppers copies. Done hai. Mains is done. Prelims, however, now requires like some extra rectification and all, and some luck. Just keep on working.